The desert stretched endlessly under a blanket of darkness, broken only by the flicker of torchlight dancing across the sand. Caravans moved like shadows, silent and purposeful, their camels plodding steadily across the dunes. The night wind carried whispers, ancient murmurs of secrets buried beneath centuries of sand, secrets that could reshape kingdoms if ever brought to light. Somewhere within this expanse, the Magi, guardians of forbidden knowledge, traveled under the cover of night, their faces hidden, their eyes reflecting a determination that seemed almost unnatural. They carried with them scrolls, fragile, ancient, and impossible to decipher for anyone not trained in their cryptic wisdom. Rumors said these scrolls contained truths so profound that empires had risen and fallen merely seeking them. In the flickering glow, the silhouettes of the travelers seemed to shift and merge with the night itself. One of the younger apprentices, barely more than a boy, clutched a rolled parchment against his chest, feeling the weight of history in his hands. Every step he took was measured, every glance over his shoulder filled with fear and anticipation. They were not alone. Eyes unseen watched from the dunes, predators hungry not for their flesh, but for the knowledge they carried. Legend spoke of such nights when entire caravans disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the desert, leaving only whispers behind. The oldest of the Magi, a figure whose age had rendered his skin almost translucent, paused and raised a hand. The caravan halted. His eyes, pale as winter frost, scanned the horizon. "We are close," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind. The sands themselves remember the path. The apprentice shivered. Close to what? He could not yet comprehend, but a strange thrill coursed through him, mingled with a fear that made the night feel alive. Every grain of sand seemed to carry a memory, every shadow a warning. Stories passed down through generations spoke of the scroll's origins in a land far to the east, beyond mountains that touched the clouds and rivers that shimmered like molten silver under the sun. The Magi had been their guardians for centuries, entrusted with protecting knowledge too potent for ordinary men. The scrolls contained not just maps, not just histories, but instructions, recipes for power, understanding of celestial movements, secrets of life and death. They were the keys to influence that could topple rulers and elevate the lowliest of men to positions of unimaginable authority. And yet, in the wrong hands, the scrolls could bring devastation, madness, even war. As the caravan pressed onward, the apprentice's mind wandered. He imagined the scholars, kings, and thieves who had once sought these scrolls, many of them vanishing in pursuit of something intangible, yet infinitely valuable. Tales told of a scribe who spent a lifetime deciphering one fragment, only to die suddenly, leaving the mystery unresolved. Others spoke of empires whose sudden rise and fall coincided with the secret movements of these scrolls. How much of history had been quietly rewritten by those who possessed forbidden knowledge? The desert seemed endless, and yet the caravan moved with purpose. The night was alive with small, almost imperceptible sounds, the rustle of sand underfoot, the distant call of a nocturnal bird, the whisper of wind over hidden ridges. Each sound carried a tension that tightened the chest and quickened the pulse. Somewhere ahead, they would find what they had traveled so far to seek, a place that existed only in fragmented maps and whispered legends. And yet, even in anticipation, there was a sense of danger so palpable it could not be ignored. Every shadow could conceal a predator, every distant flicker a trap. The apprentice dared to ask a question, his voice trembling. "Master, if the scrolls are so dangerous, why do we seek them?" The old Magi looked at him, eyes reflecting candle-like warmth, though the night was cold. "Because," he said slowly, "some truths must be held, even if the world is not ready. Some knowledge chooses its keepers, and we have been chosen." The words hung in the air like smoke, neither comforting nor frightening, but undeniably heavy. The apprentice felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, heavier than the heat of the day or the chill of the night. Hours passed in near silence, the caravan moving with deliberate patience. Stars spun above in patterns as old as time itself, constellations guiding the travelers along paths hidden to ordinary eyes. Somewhere within the shifting sands lay a hidden oasis, a place rumored to harbor fragments of the Magi's ancient library. It was said that one could hear the rustle of parchment even in the desert wind if one listened closely enough, a sound that carried centuries of knowledge and whispers of the unseen. Suddenly, the caravan came upon a rise in the dunes, and the apprentice's heart nearly stopped. The silhouette of an enormous stone structure emerged, half buried, half revealed, a monument to an age lost to memory. It was ancient, impossibly old, and yet precise in its construction, as if built with both the hands of men and the touch of something beyond understanding. The Magi's eyes softened with reverence, and for the first time, the apprentice sensed the true magnitude of their journey. They were standing at the threshold of history, at the edge of knowledge that could illuminate or destroy, a place that had resisted time, war, and human greed. The caravan halted at the base of the structure. The wind stilled for a moment, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The old Magi unrolled a portion of the scrolls, revealing scripts that shimmered faintly in the torchlight, letters that seemed alive, almost whispering. "This," he said, voice trembling with awe, "is only the beginning. What lies within these walls may change everything we believe about the past and everything we imagine for the future." The apprentice stared at the glowing scripts, heart pounding. He felt the pull of destiny, a force as irresistible as the desert winds around them. And in that moment, he understood the truth the Magi had carried for centuries. Knowledge is power, yes, but some secrets are dangerous because they choose not only who may hold them, but who must remain in the shadows, forever watching, forever guarding. As the torchlight flickered across the walls of the hidden sanctuary, one thought lingered in the air. What did they know that the world was not ready for? The Magi were not merely wanderers or scholars. They were guardians of secrets older than empires themselves. Their origin traced back to lands shrouded in mystery, places where the sun rose over mountains that scraped the heavens and rivers carved valleys like silver veins through the earth. These men and women were more than priests. They were the keepers of knowledge too potent for ordinary eyes. Every scroll, every codex, every symbol they carried was a fragment of a vast intelligence, curated over centuries, shaped by countless hands, and protected at the cost of lives. To outsiders, they seemed enigmatic, even mystical, their rituals inscrutable, their movements deliberate and purposeful. Yet behind the robes and the solemn chants, there existed a meticulous system, a hierarchy rooted in the absolute necessity of safeguarding what the world could not yet understand. In their remote sanctuaries, hidden deep within mountain caves or behind veils of desert sand, the Magi studied the heavens and the earth alike. They charted the movement of stars with precision unmatched by most civilizations, recording celestial events that would shape human destiny in ways few could comprehend. Some believed they could predict the future, not by magic, but by logic and observation, a knowledge of patterns invisible to common men. Others whispered that they had glimpsed the very mechanisms of fate, understanding forces that guided kings and beggars alike. It was said that a single decision, informed by the wisdom contained in the scrolls, could alter the course of history, tipping the balance between kingdoms, faiths, and even entire civilizations. Despite their power, the Magi were not conquerors. They did not seek to rule, only to observe, protect, and occasionally intervene in subtle ways to preserve the knowledge entrusted to them. Their lives were disciplined, their routines rigorous, and their loyalty to the scrolls absolute. Initiates underwent years of training, deciphering languages long lost to the world, learning the delicate art of preservation, understanding the consequences of misinterpreting a single symbol. Mistakes were not forgiven lightly. A scholar who mishandled a scroll or revealed its contents without proper understanding risked death, either by exile into the unforgiving desert or by more immediate, shadowy means. These measures were not cruelty, they were necessity. The knowledge was dangerous, capable of destruction in hands unprepared to wield it responsibly. The Magi's influence reached far beyond their hidden sanctuaries. They were advisors to kings, merchants, and sometimes generals, shaping decisions behind a veil of discretion. Often, history records the outcomes without acknowledging the invisible hand that guided them. A treaty won, a rebellion quelled, a city spared. These were not always acts of chance. In some cases, a scroll's subtle wisdom had redirected events, leaving the world unaware of the invisible threads that bound the fates of men and nations. Those who had stumbled upon these truths outside the Magi's guidance rarely survived to tell the tale. And yet, tales persisted, carried in whispers across continents, of strangers who returned from the East with knowledge too strange to believe, lives transformed, their destinies irrevocably altered. Among the Magi, there existed a hierarchy as complex as the knowledge they protected. The elders, often cloaked in robes dyed with the rarest pigments, were the keepers of the oldest scrolls. Their eyes had witnessed centuries, their memory encompassing events that most thought lost to time. Below them were the scribes, who devoted their lives to copying, studying, and understanding the texts, ensuring that no insight was lost and no symbol misinterpreted. Apprentices, often young and untested, carried out the tasks necessary for the survival of their order, tending fires, carrying messages, and guarding the entrances to the sacred libraries. For these apprentices, every day was a lesson in discipline, patience, and the weight of responsibility. They learned that the cost of knowledge could be measured not just in years or effort, but in the very lives of those who sought to misuse it. It was said that the scrolls themselves were not merely passive repositories of information. Some contained astronomical charts that predicted events centuries ahead. Others contained maps to forgotten cities or treasures, while a few held insights into medicine, philosophy, and human behavior so advanced that they could seem miraculous to ordinary minds. One scroll, rumored to have vanished entirely, was said to hold instructions for understanding life and death itself, a text so powerful that even the Magi approached it with reverent caution. The scrolls were not merely tools. They were alive in a sense, demanding respect, care, and wisdom from those who sought to interpret them. One misstep, one hasty decision, could trigger consequences far beyond the immediate observer's understanding. The Magi's secrecy extended beyond their knowledge. Their very existence was often doubted by outsiders. To most, they were myths, legends whispered in markets, campfires, and royal courts. Those who claimed to have seen a magus described a figure moving with uncanny purpose, eyes reflecting both wisdom and warning. Attempts to follow or confront them invariably failed. The desert, the mountains, and the hidden passages of cities seemed to shift to protect their paths. Those who tried to steal knowledge, to reveal secrets prematurely, vanished without a trace, leaving only questions, fear, and the occasional fragment of truth behind. And yet, for all their secrecy, the Magi were not devoid of humanity. They laughed quietly in their sanctuaries. They debated and argued. They mourned the losses of those who had failed them. Their world was not one of cold calculation alone, but of profound understanding of human nature. They knew greed, fear, ambition, and devotion, and these emotions were woven into the very way they safeguarded their knowledge. To the outside world, their actions might seem impenetrable, even harsh. To themselves, every measure was a necessary balance between survival, preservation, and moral responsibility. As the apprentice watched the elders move among the scrolls, he felt both awe and fear. The weight of centuries pressed on him, and he began to understand the gravity of their purpose. These were not simply keepers of books. They were custodians of civilization's most dangerous truths. They existed in the margins of history, in the shadows where empires rose and fell without understanding why. And now, as the desert wind whispered through the dunes and the torchlight flickered across the hidden sanctuaries of the Magi, the apprentice realized that he had become part of something far greater than himself. Something that could change the world if wielded wisely, or destroy it if mishandled. Every step forward was both a privilege and a burden. Every scroll touched carried the silent weight of generations. The Magi's eyes, ever watchful, reminded him that curiosity was not enough. Wisdom, patience, and respect were essential. And as the sun began to rise over the distant mountains, casting golden light over the desert sands, the apprentice understood the first lesson of the Magi. Knowledge is power, but power without understanding is a blade that cuts both the wielder and the world around them. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the truth became clear. The scrolls were more than ink and parchment. They were the heartbeat of human ambition, the echo of civilizations long gone, and the silent architects of a future that had yet to unfold. To touch them, to understand them, was to stand on the threshold of history itself, and to face the eternal question that had defined the Magi for centuries. Who is worthy of such knowledge, and what will they do with it? The caravan moved eastward as dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Each camel's hooves sank into the shifting sand, leaving faint tracks that the wind would soon erase, as if the desert itself wanted to guard the secrets carried across its expanse. The apprentice walked alongside the animals, still clutching the precious scrolls against his chest, feeling their weight grow heavier with every mile. It was not just the physical burden, but the responsibility, the awareness that the knowledge he carried could shape kingdoms or destroy lives if it fell into the wrong hands. As the caravan navigated the jagged terrain of rocky outcrops and wind-swept dunes, the young apprentice marveled at the landscapes. Mountains rose like frozen waves, their peaks piercing the heavens, while valleys concealed streams that glinted like liquid silver. This was a world at once beautiful and hostile, indifferent to human ambition, yet holding the power to test every traveler's resolve. The Magi moved with a quiet authority, their eyes scanning for dangers unseen, their gestures subtle warnings to one another. The apprentice sensed that these guardians had walked these paths countless times, their bodies remembering routes that even the most detailed maps could not capture. There were dangers in the desert beyond the obvious. Sandstorms that could bury a caravan overnight, treacherous cliffs, and predators that thrived in silence. Yet, it was the human element that posed the greatest threat. Bandits and rival scholars had long sought fragments of the Magi's knowledge, willing to kill or die for the promise of power contained in the scrolls. Every shadow could conceal a spy. Every distant figure could be an enemy. The apprentice's pulse quickened with each unexpected movement. The desert had become a living entity, testing their vigilance with every step. At night, the campfires flickered like tiny constellations, their warmth a fragile comfort against the chill of the desert. Around the fire, the Magi shared fragments of stories, ancient lessons hidden within allegory, teaching the apprentices through words that seemed ordinary but contained layers of meaning. They spoke of kings who had been toppled not by armies, but by miscalculated decisions influenced by stolen knowledge, of cities that vanished from maps as if erased by unseen hands. These tales were warnings, yet they carried a subtle allure, a promise that understanding could unlock mysteries beyond imagination. The apprentice struggled to keep pace, both physically and mentally. His mind raced with questions about the scrolls, about the Magi, and about the purpose of their journey. Why now? Why were they risking so much to transport knowledge that had survived untouched for centuries? The answers were elusive, concealed within the deliberate silence and cryptic glances of the elders. One thing, however, was unmistakable. This journey was about more than survival or study. It was about destiny, and destiny, the Magi seemed to understand, did not wait for those who hesitated. As the caravan pressed further east, the landscape began to change. The dunes gave way to rocky plains, dotted with twisted acacia trees and the occasional oasis, shimmering mirages rising in the heat of the day. These subtle signs of life offered relief, but also heightened tension. Where water appeared, there could be danger. Where life flourished, enemies could lie in wait. The Magi's movements were fluid, graceful, and deliberate, their experience evident in the way they guided the caravan. Every path chosen, every detour taken, was part of a strategy designed to protect not only the scrolls, but the very lives of those who carried them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and fiery oranges, the apprentice noticed a small figure observing the caravan from a distance. He tensed, unsure if it was human or an animal, friend or foe. The Magi's eyes, sharp as falcons, followed his gaze, and without a word, a subtle nod passed between them. The figure vanished before anyone could react, leaving only the unsettling feeling of being watched. The apprentice realized then that the desert held eyes everywhere, and that those who sought the scrolls were patient, cunning, and often invisible until it was too late. Despite the danger, the journey carried an undeniable allure. The desert revealed its secrets in small, breathtaking ways. The flash of a hawk against the sky, the distant glimmer of a hidden stream, the way the wind sculpted the dunes into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. These moments reminded the apprentice why the Magi revered their surroundings so deeply. The desert was both teacher and protector, shaping those who moved within it, revealing truths only to those who observed carefully, and hiding them from the impatient and unworthy. Days passed, each blending seamlessly into the next, the caravan moving steadily toward an unknown destination. The apprentice learned to read subtle signs, the angle of the sun, the position of distant mountains, the patterns of shifting sand. Each observation brought a fragment of understanding, a sense of being connected to a world far larger than his own experience. Yet the weight of responsibility never lessened. The knowledge contained in the scrolls was a constant reminder that a single mistake could undo centuries of careful protection. And then, as the caravan crested a particularly high dune, the apprentice glimpsed something unexpected. Nestled within a valley below, partially obscured by shadows, lay the remnants of what appeared to be an ancient settlement. Stone walls jutted from the sand like the bones of a forgotten beast, and a faint outline of buildings suggested a civilization long abandoned. The Magi halted, scanning the area, their expressions unreadable but tense. The apprentice felt a shiver of anticipation and fear. Was this a relic of the past, or a trap set by those who would steal the scrolls? The desert held its secrets tightly, revealing only what it chose, and now the caravan had arrived at a threshold where the past and present would collide. In that moment, the apprentice understood the true nature of their journey. It was not simply about transporting scrolls across a barren land. It was about navigating a world where every step carried weight, where knowledge could be a weapon, a salvation, or a curse. The desert had tested them, shown them beauty and danger in equal measure, and now it beckoned them toward a discovery that would challenge everything they had learned. The horizon seemed to shimmer with possibilities, and in the silence, one question lingered in the apprentice's mind, echoing the warnings of the elders. Are we ready for what lies ahead, or will the secrets we seek consume us before we even find them? The scrolls themselves were enigmatic, fragile pieces of history, each one a silent witness to centuries long past. When unrolled, their delicate parchment seemed to breathe with an almost imperceptible life of its own, the ink shimmering faintly in the flickering torchlight. Symbols danced across the surface, intricate and deliberate, some resembling letters, others shapes that defied conventional understanding. The apprentice leaned closer, feeling a thrill that mingled with fear. These were no ordinary manuscripts. They were repositories of a knowledge so profound that even a single misinterpretation could ripple across time, altering events in ways invisible to the casual observer. Legends surrounding the scrolls spoke of their origins in the East, in lands where scholars devoted entire lifetimes to understanding the universe and the forces that governed it. Some were said to contain astronomical charts, predicting celestial alignments decades, even centuries into the future. Others supposedly detailed methods of healing, alchemy, and philosophy so advanced that the wisdom seemed almost magical. And yet, the greatest mystery was not the knowledge itself, but the secrecy with which it was guarded. How had such documents survived wars, plagues, and the relentless march of time, only to appear now in the hands of a caravan winding through the desert? The apprentice ran his fingers lightly over the edges of one scroll, marveling at the precision of its creation. Every symbol was etched with care, every line intentional. Yet the meaning was hidden, layered in complexity that even the Magi approached with caution. The elders insisted on absolute reverence, their voices low and deliberate as they instructed the apprentices in the correct way to handle each manuscript. These scrolls are alive in a sense, one elder explained. They carry the weight of generations, the intentions of those who created them. To touch them carelessly is to invite the consequences of history itself. The apprentice shivered at the thought, realizing that ignorance was not merely dangerous, it could be fatal. Stories told of those who had attempted to decipher a scroll without permission, driven by greed or curiosity, only to vanish without a trace. Some disappeared in deserts much like the one they now traversed. Others were rumored to have succumbed to madness, their minds unable to comprehend the breadth of the knowledge they had glimpsed. The Magi spoke of these incidents not as warnings, but as lessons, a way to instill discipline and respect. "The scrolls do not forgive," one elder whispered as he adjusted a parchment carefully, "and the world does not pause for those who fail." The apprentice felt a chill, understanding that the weight he carried was both literal and symbolic, representing centuries of vigilance and sacrifice. Not all scrolls were alike. Some contained text written in ancient scripts that had been lost to all but a few, the meaning encoded in layers of metaphor, numbers, and illustrations. Others were visual in nature, diagrams that mapped not merely geography, but the movement of celestial bodies, the cycles of the seasons, and patterns of human behavior. Each scroll was a puzzle, a deliberate test of intellect and patience, designed to ensure that only those worthy could access its secrets. The Magi, through countless generations, had perfected methods to decipher and interpret without succumbing to the dangers hidden within. The caravan paused as the eldest Magi carefully unrolled one particularly large manuscript. The apprentice gasped. The scroll was unlike any he had seen before. It contained a map, but not of ordinary lands. Cities and rivers were drawn with a precision that suggested knowledge of geography far beyond what most maps of the era offered. Symbols marked locations that had long vanished from common memory, and annotations hinted at resources, alliances, and events that could tip the balance of power for entire regions. The apprentice felt a surge of awe and fear. This was not merely a map. It was a key, a guide to influence, strategy, and understanding that could alter history itself. Yet, for all their apparent clarity, the scrolls carried layers of intentional obfuscation. Some passages seemed to contradict others. Some symbols were repeated with slight variations, and certain sections were deliberately obscured with patterns that defied interpretation. The apprentice realized that the scrolls demanded not just intelligence, but patience, discernment, and moral judgment. Misreading them could lead not only to failure, but to catastrophe. The Magi approached each parchment with a reverence that bordered on fear, aware that the consequences of a single misstep could ripple across time and space. Whispers in the caravan spoke of a scroll that had been lost entirely, one rumored to hold knowledge so potent it could reshape life and death itself. The apprentice had heard the rumors, but seeing these texts in person brought a gravity to the tales that no story could convey. The scrolls were not just documents. They were legacies of civilizations, vessels of human ambition and understanding, and warnings carved into time. The Magi were their guardians, and their journey across the desert was a continuation of an age-old responsibility to preserve, protect, and interpret without falling prey to the lure of unchecked power. As night fell, the campfires reflected off the sand, casting long shadows across the open pages. The apprentice studied a single scroll under the flickering light, tracing the lines with his fingers as if hoping to absorb its secrets by touch alone. He felt a thrill of connection, a sense that he was touching something far greater than himself, a current flowing from generations long gone into the fragile hands of the present. And yet, alongside that exhilaration was a deep, underlying fear. Knowledge could illuminate, but it could also consume. The scrolls were alive in a sense, carrying both promise and peril. In that quiet desert night, the apprentice understood a truth he had not grasped before. The scrolls were not mere relics to be studied. They were forces to be respected. They held the wisdom of countless generations, shaped not by accidents, but by intention, designed to challenge, guide, and sometimes punish those who encountered them. And as the wind stirred the sand around the camp, he felt the weight of history pressing upon him, whispering that the world had not yet seen the full power of the Magi's knowledge. One thought lingered, echoing the warnings of his mentors. What is written here could change everything, but only if the world is ready to see it. Not all who sought the scrolls survived. Tales passed down in hushed whispers spoke of scholars, scribes, and adventurers who had devoted their lives to understanding the Magi's texts, only to vanish without explanation. Some disappeared within the deserts themselves, swallowed by sandstorms or lost to treacherous dunes. Others returned, but with minds fractured, muttering cryptic phrases that no one could interpret, as though the scrolls had imprinted themselves upon their consciousness and then abandoned them to despair. Every disappearance carried a lesson. Knowledge without discipline was dangerous, and curiosity unchecked could be fatal. The apprentice had heard these stories countless times, yet seeing the scrolls in person gave them an immediacy that words could never convey. He imagined the fates of those scholars, feeling both awe and dread. One, it was said, had spent decades attempting to decipher a fragment of an astronomical manuscript. On the day he thought he had finally understood it, he vanished without a trace, leaving his work half-finished and his library in ruins. Some believed he had glimpsed too much, that understanding even a fragment of the scroll's secrets could unbalance the human mind, overwhelming reason and morality alike. Another tale spoke of a young scribe who attempted to smuggle a fragment out of a Magi sanctuary, hoping to sell it to the highest bidder in distant lands. He had been brilliant, meticulous, and ambitious, qualities that the Magi valued in their apprentices. Yet ambition proved his undoing. The scroll, once removed from his protective care, seemed to resist comprehension. He became obsessed, poring over the parchment day and night, until his mind unraveled. By the time he was found, he had carved symbols into the walls of his room, muttering warnings that no one could decipher. He lived, but only as a shadow of himself, a living testament to the peril of seeking forbidden knowledge prematurely. Even among the Magi, the apprentice learned failure carried consequences. Those who misinterpreted texts or showed reckless impatience were quietly removed from their duties, often exiled to remote regions where survival was uncertain. The order operated with an unspoken understanding. The preservation of knowledge demanded discipline, loyalty, and humility. Every scroll, every fragment, was a living entity, and disrespecting it could have repercussions not only for the individual, but for entire civilizations. The stakes were not theoretical. They were immediate, tangible, and sometimes deadly. The desert around the caravan seemed to echo these warnings. Every gust of wind, every shifting shadow felt charged with meaning. The apprentice noticed that even the elders moved with deliberate care, their hands brushing parchment with reverence, their eyes scanning the horizon for threats invisible to the untrained observer. This was not simply protection against thieves or natural hazards. It was an understanding that the scrolls themselves attracted attention, drawing the curious, the greedy, and the reckless. The desert, in its silent vastness, became a crucible for those who dared to pursue the path of knowledge. Stories of disappearances were not always about punishment. Sometimes they were about obsession. Scholars who became consumed by a single scroll often lost themselves in its layers of meaning. Hours turned into days, days into months, and months into years. Relationships frayed, alliances dissolved, and entire careers ended because the individual could not resist the allure of understanding. The apprentice realized that the danger of the scrolls was not just their content, but the intensity of their pull. They promised power, insight, and mastery, yet exacted a price measured in sanity, morality, and sometimes life itself. Among the tales, one in particular struck the apprentice. It was of a historian who had discovered a reference to a lost library, a repository of scrolls said to rival even the Magi's collection. He pursued it relentlessly, mapping obscure trade routes, interviewing travelers, and deciphering ancient inscriptions. When he finally arrived at what he believed was the site, he found nothing but ruins and sand. Yet even in failure, he could not let go. He disappeared within the desert, leaving behind only fragments of notes that hinted at revelations so profound that even historians debated whether they had ever existed. The story carried a simple, chilling message. Some knowledge could not be pursued without consequence. Despite these dangers, the human thirst for understanding persisted. Scholars were drawn to the scrolls not just by ambition, but by a profound sense of curiosity, a desire to glimpse the workings of the universe as the Magi had done for centuries. The apprentice saw echoes of this in himself, a mixture of fear, reverence, and exhilaration. He knew that the journey they were undertaking was fraught with peril, yet he also understood that the rewards, if approached with respect and discipline, could reshape his understanding of the world. At night, around the flickering campfires, the elders shared these stories with a purpose. They were cautionary tales, yet also lessons in human nature. The scrolls, they explained, were mirrors, reflecting both the brilliance and the flaws of those who sought them. Greed, ambition, and impatience were punished, but patience, humility, and reverence were rewarded with insight. The apprentice listened intently, recognizing that his own path would demand more than endurance. It would require wisdom, restraint, and an understanding that knowledge itself was alive, unpredictable, and sometimes merciless. The desert, vast and indifferent, seemed to embody these lessons. Each step taken by the caravan felt like a test, each night under the stars a silent judgment. The apprentice understood that the disappearances of past scholars were not random. They were warnings etched into the collective memory of the Magi, designed to prepare those who remained for the challenges ahead. And as he watched the flickering torchlight illuminate the scrolls, he felt the weight of history pressing upon him, a reminder that curiosity without discipline could be a knife turned inward, cutting the seeker before the secrets could be revealed. By the time the caravan settled for the night, the apprentice had internalized a sobering truth. The pursuit of knowledge was not a simple journey of discovery. It was a delicate balance between desire and restraint, ambition and wisdom. The scrolls were alive in a way that transcended ink and parchment. They were tests, guardians, and sometimes judges. And for those who failed to respect them, the consequences were absolute. The apprentice's pulse quickened as he realized the enormity of what lay ahead. Every step brought them closer not only to the scrolls themselves, but to the hidden forces that had shaped history, forces that demanded vigilance, courage, and, above all, respect. And in the quiet of the desert night, one thought lingered in his mind, echoing the warnings that had defined the Magi for centuries. To seek the scrolls is to flirt with destiny itself, but only the disciplined will survive to understand what they truly hold. The first contact between East and West had always been more than mere trade. Along the caravan routes, knowledge flowed as quietly and deliberately as spices and silk. Merchants whispered of ancient manuscripts, scholars shared fragmentary maps, and explorers carried coded letters that hinted at civilizations far older and wiser than those known to the West. The scrolls of the Magi, carried carefully across deserts, mountains, and rivers, were at the center of this flow. They were not only physical objects, but vessels of ideas that could reshape understanding of the world, if only they were interpreted correctly. As the caravan pressed further eastward, the apprentice observed the subtle signs of this exchange. He saw traders handling objects with care, their conversations punctuated by careful glances, as though the words they spoke were meant only for the initiated. Merchants from distant lands, their clothing vibrant and unfamiliar, spoke in multiple tongues, negotiating routes and alliances that seemed ordinary on the surface, but held the invisible weight of strategy and foresight. Some carried fragments of scrolls tucked away under cloaks, while others transported entire manuscripts, moving in secrecy to protect knowledge that could ignite power struggles far beyond the desert. The Magi themselves were aware of these currents. Though their purpose was to preserve and protect, they understood that knowledge could not remain entirely static. Occasionally, they allowed fragments to pass into Western hands, not recklessly, but with deliberate intent. A map here, a diagram there, enough to influence trade, agriculture, or navigation, yet carefully calibrated so that the full depth of understanding remained hidden. The apprentice began to grasp the subtlety of their strategy. This was not merely preservation. It was a form of guidance, shaping human progress while avoiding chaos, ensuring that only the prepared could access the most dangerous truths. The caravan made its way through cities that had become crossroads of civilization. Dusty streets echoed with the calls of merchants, while scholars debated philosophy in shaded courtyards. It was in these places that East and West first collided, and where the hidden power of the Magi scrolls began to leave subtle fingerprints on history. One evening, in a bustling market, the apprentice saw a scholar from the West examining a fragment of parchment, unaware of its origins. The markings were faint, almost cryptic, but contained a concept so advanced that it could challenge the foundational ideas of his homeland. The young apprentice realized that even a small exposure to such knowledge could alter thought, culture, and power, rippling quietly across centuries. The Magi themselves observed these interactions with keen eyes. They were guardians, yes, but also subtle manipulators of the flow of information. They understood that knowledge, like water, could erode or nourish depending on how it was directed. The apprentice began to see the brilliance of their strategy. Western scholars, without ever encountering the full breadth of the scrolls, were nevertheless influenced by them. Wars were fought differently, alliances shifted, and innovations appeared with uncanny foresight, all guided, perhaps unconsciously, by the fragments of Eastern wisdom that had slipped into the West. But such exchanges were fraught with danger. Not every scholar or ruler could be trusted, and the Magi had learned through bitter experience that even a single misstep could lead to catastrophe. A fragment revealed too early could incite jealousy, greed, or conflict. The apprentice listened as the elders recounted tales of kingdoms nearly destroyed by prematurely revealed knowledge, of secret exchanges that had sparked subtle but decisive power shifts. Every lesson carried the weight of human ambition, and every story reinforced the importance of discretion, patience, and moral judgment in handling the scrolls. One story in particular caught the apprentice's attention. A Venetian trader, it was said, had come into possession of a fragment describing an astronomical phenomenon centuries ahead of common understanding. He showed it to scholars, who dismissed it at first, only to realize later that it contained accurate predictions that would revolutionize navigation. Ships were guided by these principles without understanding their origin, their voyages safer, faster, and more precise. Yet the trader never survived long enough to see the full impact of his discovery. He vanished on a return journey, leaving only hints of his findings. This story underscored the duality of the scroll's power. They could enlighten, but they could also consume. The apprentice began to notice patterns in these exchanges. Knowledge moved along hidden currents, reaching receptive minds while bypassing those unprepared to understand it. The Magi did not act openly. Their influence was subtle, almost invisible, like the wind shaping dunes over centuries. Yet the results were undeniable. Cities flourished where insight had been applied, disasters were mitigated before they struck, and innovations appeared that seemed to spring from nowhere. The young apprentice realized that the Magi were not simply historians or custodians. They were architects of civilization, guiding the flow of understanding across continents and centuries. Traveling further east, the caravan encountered remnants of ancient libraries, some partially destroyed, some meticulously preserved. The apprentice was struck by the care with which the Magi navigated these sites. They did not merely pass through. They studied, recorded, and sometimes retrieved fragments of knowledge that had been hidden or abandoned. Even in ruins, the scrolls' echoes were palpable, as though the buildings themselves remembered the wisdom contained within. Here, the apprentice saw firsthand how fragile the thread of history could be, and how easily civilizations could forget or lose the most profound insights. The apprentice's understanding of the Magi deepened with each day. He realized that their mission was not merely about protecting knowledge, but about influencing the West in ways invisible to ordinary eyes. Fragments of scrolls, once introduced carefully and deliberately, shaped thought, philosophy, and governance subtly yet powerfully. A ruler might make a decision guided by unseen insight. A scholar might create a discovery based on hints embedded in the text. A navigator might chart safer seas without ever knowing why. It was a silent hand, shaping the course of human events while remaining invisible, enigmatic, and untouchable. By the time the sun set over distant mountains, the apprentice had grasped the scope of their journey. They were not merely transporting scrolls across deserts. They were shepherding history itself, guiding the flow of ideas, ensuring that knowledge reached the world in measured doses, and protecting it from those who might wield it recklessly. The desert wind carried whispers of civilizations long gone, yet also hinted at the power of what was yet to come. Every day, every mile, every careful observation brought them closer not only to their immediate goal, but to an understanding of how the East had quietly shaped the West, and how knowledge, when handled wisely, could alter the very fabric of history. And as the apprentice lay beneath a canopy of stars, listening to the distant calls of nocturnal birds and the rustle of the desert, he pondered the subtle question that had guided the Magi for centuries. How much of the world as we know has been quietly written by hands we cannot see, by minds that protect truths too dangerous to reveal? The Library of Alexandria was said to hold every scrap of knowledge the ancient world had produced, a treasure trove of human ambition, curiosity, and understanding. But much of it was lost, consumed by fire, neglect, or deliberate destruction. Scholars whispered that fragments had survived, hidden in secret repositories, passed along through generations, and eventually finding their way into the hands of the Magi. The apprentice had heard the legends, but seeing the scrolls in person brought a new clarity. Some knowledge survives not by chance, but by the careful vigilance of those chosen to protect it. The desert carried these remnants, scattered across continents, quietly shaping the course of civilizations. The Magi regarded the preservation of such knowledge as sacred. They understood that a single lost manuscript could erase centuries of progress, and that the wisdom of one civilization could prevent catastrophes, inspire innovations, or guide rulers to make decisions that would affect millions. The apprentice watched as the elders carefully handled fragments of texts, some with edges frayed by centuries, others surprisingly intact, their ink still vivid against the yellowed parchment. Each piece told a story, not just of the ideas it contained, but of the people who had once cared for it, fought for it, and sometimes died to protect it. The desert around the caravan seemed to mirror the fragility of this knowledge. Winds shifted dunes constantly, erasing footprints, hiding landmarks, and burying secrets beneath layers of sand. Yet within this harsh landscape, the scrolls persisted, protected by careful guardianship and the silent discipline of the Magi. The apprentice began to understand the metaphor. Knowledge, like the desert, was both fragile and enduring, hidden from those unprepared, yet capable of shaping the world for those who could find it and understand it. Stories of the library's lost works echoed through the caravan. One fragment, it was said, contained advanced medical knowledge, centuries ahead of its time. Another offered mathematical principles that could alter engineering and architecture for generations. Yet others delved into philosophy and governance, offering insights into leadership, justice, and the human condition. The Magi did not hoard this knowledge selfishly. They safeguarded it, carefully determining when, how, and to whom fragments could be revealed. Every choice carried weight, for the wrong revelation could lead to disaster, as history had repeatedly shown. The apprentice reflected on the human cost of such preservation. Scholars, scribes, and explorers had risked everything to recover fragments of the past, many vanishing in the pursuit of understanding. Some were caught in wars, others perished in deserts, and some were driven to madness by glimpses of knowledge too vast for a single lifetime. The Magi honored these sacrifices quietly, integrating lessons from their failures into their ongoing vigilance. Every scroll carried echoes of the past, warnings, triumphs, and tragedies, reminding the apprentice that knowledge was never neutral. It was alive, demanding respect and discipline. As the caravan traveled through abandoned ruins and hidden valleys, the apprentice noticed remnants of past civilizations, crumbling walls, collapsed libraries, and faded inscriptions that hinted at lost wisdom. The Magi paused at each site, carefully documenting what remained, sometimes retrieving fragments that could be preserved and interpreted later. The desert, in its silence, seemed to guard these remnants, revealing them only to those who approached with reverence and patience. It was a delicate dance between discovery and respect, between curiosity and humility, and the apprentice felt both exhilaration and apprehension with every step. The Magi spoke occasionally of deliberate erasure. Some knowledge, they explained, had been destroyed to prevent misuse. Empires, fearful of ideas that could undermine their power, had systematically obliterated texts, erased libraries, and silenced scholars. The apprentice felt a chill. The loss of human wisdom was not accidental. It was a force of history itself, shaping the world in ways often invisible. The scrolls they now carried were survivors of these purges, fragile links in a chain of human endeavor that had weathered fire, neglect, and ambition. Their journey was part of a continuum, a careful effort to ensure that what remained would endure and guide future generations. Night fell, and the caravan set up camp under a sky ablaze with stars. Around the fire, the apprentice listened as the elders recounted the fates of ancient scholars, explorers, and philosophers, those who had sought knowledge and paid the ultimate price. Each story reinforced a vital lesson. Curiosity alone was not enough. Discipline, patience, and reverence were essential. The apprentice felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Every scroll he carried was more than parchment and ink. It was a fragment of civilization itself, a silent witness to the triumphs and failures of humanity, demanding careful guardianship. One evening, As a cold wind swept across the dunes, the apprentice examined a fragment he had retrieved earlier. It was a map, faint and frayed, showing regions long vanished from memory. Symbols and annotations hinted at discoveries, trade routes, and knowledge that had once been carefully guarded. The apprentice traced the lines with his fingers, feeling a connection across centuries, a bridge between past and present, between lost civilizations and the Magi who now preserve their wisdom. In that moment, he realized the profound truth. Knowledge that survived destruction is not merely information. It is power, responsibility, and a testament to human resilience. The desert, indifferent and vast, seemed to underscore this lesson. Its silence was not emptiness, but a repository of memory, as if every grain of sand carried echoes of the past. The apprentice understood that their journey was more than a mission. It was a continuation of history, a sacred duty to ensure that knowledge, once almost lost, would persist. And yet, he could not ignore the ever-present danger. The world beyond the desert was filled with those who might misuse what the Magi protected, who would see the scrolls not as treasures of understanding, but as instruments of ambition, greed, or conquest. By the time the caravan settled for the night, the apprentice had absorbed a new awareness of history itself. The past was not fixed. It was fragile, shaped by both preservation and destruction, by those who sought to uncover and those who sought to erase. The scrolls were survivors, and the Magi were their guardians, navigating a delicate balance between secrecy and revelation, risk and responsibility. Every step taken in the desert carried weight. Every decision resonated with the echoes of civilizations long gone. And as the apprentice gazed up at the constellations, ancient patterns guiding the caravan, he pondered the delicate question that had defined the Magi for centuries. What is worth preserving? What must remain hidden? And who is capable of understanding what survives? The Magi had long spoken of hidden chambers, secret repositories tucked away in the most remote and inaccessible corners of the East. These sanctuaries were more than storage spaces. They were temples of knowledge, carefully constructed to protect the most potent scrolls from theft, decay, and human error. The apprentice had only imagined such places, their existence almost mythical, whispered about in tales around flickering campfires. Yet now, as the caravan approached a rugged canyon where the wind whistled through jagged cliffs, the possibility of discovering one became terrifyingly real. The canyon walls loomed over them, their sheer faces shadowed by the fading light of dusk. The Magi moved with deliberate care, their footsteps measured and precise, their eyes scanning every crevice for signs of danger or concealment. The apprentice clutched the scrolls close to his chest, feeling their weight, not just physical but moral. The knowledge within was powerful, sacred, and dangerous. Each step into the canyon felt like a step further into history itself, a passage into a world where time had preserved secrets that the outside world had long forgotten. At the canyon's narrowest point, the caravan halted. The eldest Magus approached a hidden ledge, examining the rock face with a practiced eye. After a silent gesture, he pressed a sequence of symbols etched into the stone, almost invisible to the untrained observer. With a faint rumble, a section of the cliff shifted, revealing a narrow passage carved into the rock. The apprentice felt a surge of awe and fear. This was the entrance to a sanctuary, one that had remained hidden from all but the most dedicated guardians. The air that escaped from the chamber was cool and still, carrying with it the faint scent of aged parchment, stone, and incense, a sensory echo of centuries of study and preservation. Inside, The chamber was unlike anything the apprentice had imagined. Shelves carved directly from the rock held scrolls stacked meticulously, some tied with silk ribbons, others encased in bronze or clay. The walls were inscribed with symbols, protective sigils that spoke of knowledge as both sacred and dangerous. Torches flickered along the chamber, casting dancing shadows that made the space feel alive. It was a repository not merely of information, but of history itself, a place where the thoughts, discoveries, and wisdom of countless generations had been preserved in their purest form. The apprentice's fingers trembled as he touched a scroll. Its surface was delicate, yet the ink remained vivid, a testament to the care with which it had been created and maintained. The symbols on the parchment were unfamiliar, intricate, and deliberate, requiring a mind attuned to the subtle rhythms of ancient knowledge to decipher. He realized that the scrolls were not simply objects to be studied. They were puzzles, tests of perception, patience, and understanding. One misstep, one careless interpretation could unravel not just the meaning of a single text, but potentially the insights of an entire civilization. The Magi moved silently through the chamber, retrieving specific scrolls with practiced hands. Some were studied briefly, their contents noted, and then returned to their resting places. Others were carefully packed for transport, destined to continue the journey to regions where they could be preserved or introduced to select scholars under controlled conditions. The apprentice observed, absorbing the weight of the responsibility. Every choice the Magi made was deliberate. Every action calculated to balance preservation with cautious revelation. The chamber itself was a reminder that knowledge was alive, demanding vigilance, respect, and wisdom from those who engaged with it. The air in the chamber seemed to hum with the energy of centuries. It was a place of silence and contemplation, where every scroll carried the echoes of its creator. Some contained astronomical charts predicting celestial alignments decades in advance, while others held philosophical treatises that challenged conventional understanding of morality, leadership, and human behavior. A few contained instructions for crafting devices or remedies that seemed miraculous to modern eyes. The apprentice realized that this chamber was not merely a repository. It was a testament to human ambition, creativity, and perseverance, preserved against the erosive forces of time, war, and neglect. Yet with the awe came fear. The apprentice could not ignore the warnings he had heard throughout the journey. Those who mishandled such knowledge, who approached it without discipline or respect, often paid a steep price. Some were driven to obsession, their lives consumed by a single text. Others vanished entirely, leaving only fragments and rumors behind. The chamber, magnificent as it was, carried a latent danger. Knowledge, the apprentice understood, could illuminate and destroy in equal measure. It was a force to be revered, not possessed recklessly. As night deepened, the Magi prepared to spend the hours cataloging and studying the scrolls. The apprentice sat quietly, tracing the inscriptions on the walls, absorbing the atmosphere. Each symbol seemed purposeful, deliberate, as though the chamber itself was teaching him patience and attentiveness. He began to understand that the Magi's role was not simply preservation. It was mentorship, guidance, and protection of civilization's most potent legacies. They had dedicated their lives to ensuring that knowledge was neither lost nor abused, and that only those ready to comprehend its depth could access it. One particular scroll caught the apprentice's eye. Its surface was etched with patterns unlike any he had seen, a combination of symbols, diagrams, and annotations that suggested a level of complexity beyond ordinary comprehension. The elder noticed his interest and, without speaking, gestured that it would be studied carefully under strict supervision. The apprentice felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with a deep sense of humility. This scroll, like many others, held potential that could transform understanding of the world, but only if approached with reverence, discipline, and wisdom. The chamber seemed to hum with possibilities. Every scroll was a doorway into the past, a glimpse into civilizations that had shaped human thought, and a guide to futures not yet realized. The apprentice realized that their journey was not just about transporting texts. It was about navigating the very currents of human history, ensuring that knowledge survived, flourished, and was introduced to the world at the right time. The responsibility was immense, the stakes immeasurable. He understood why the Magi spoke so often of discipline, patience, and moral judgment. Without these, even the most well-intentioned scholar could bring disaster. By dawn, the apprentice felt transformed. The chamber had revealed not only its contents, but its purpose, to remind all who enter that knowledge is both power and responsibility, a force that demands respect and understanding. Every scroll carried the weight of generations, every symbol a whisper from the past, every annotation a guide to the future. And as he stepped back into the canyon, following the caravan through the desert once more, the apprentice knew that their journey had only begun. The world beyond the hidden chamber awaited, full of both opportunity and danger, and the Magi's mission was to ensure that the knowledge they carried would survive and guide humanity wisely. And in that moment, one thought lingered, echoing through the canyon walls and the apprentice's mind. The secrets of the East are not merely to be found. They must be earned, understood, and respected, or the cost will be unimaginable. The desert, vast and silent, seemed a perfect protector, yet the apprentice had begun to understand that secrecy was never absolute. Whispers of the Magi's scrolls had traveled ahead of the caravan, carried by traders, travelers, and the occasional careless scholar. Rumors of their power spread like sparks across dry tinder, reaching ears that hungered for knowledge, wealth, and influence. And where desire stirred, danger followed. The apprentice felt the tension as a new awareness settled over the group. The scrolls were not only a treasure of wisdom, they were a target, and their guardians now moved through a world increasingly aware of what they carried. It began subtly. On a hot afternoon, as the caravan crossed a plateau, the apprentice noticed distant figures watching from a ridge. At first, they seemed mere travelers, lost or curious. Yet the Magi's eyes, sharp and unyielding, recognized the signs immediately. The observers moved with intent, their posture and timing deliberate. They were waiting, analyzing, testing the caravan, and the apprentice's heart pounded at the realization. Their journey had drawn attention, and not all who observed would act with caution or respect. Some sought the scrolls for power, others for personal gain, and all posed a threat to the delicate balance the Magi worked to maintain. The elders moved with quiet precision, signaling the caravan to adjust its course subtly, avoiding confrontation while remaining vigilant. The apprentice noticed how seamlessly they coordinated, their gestures minimal but exact. Each step, each adjustment, was calculated to preserve safety while maintaining the secrecy of their mission. The desert, which had seemed merely hostile and indifferent before, now appeared as a strategic partner, offering concealment, diversion, and protection. Yet even this natural safeguard could not guarantee immunity from human ambition, which, he realized, could be far more relentless than the elements. That night, around the campfire, the elders spoke in hushed tones of those who had sought the scrolls in ages past. They described factions willing to kill for fragments, empires eager to gain strategic advantage, and rogue scholars driven by obsession. Each story carried a lesson. Curiosity without discipline could invite catastrophe. The apprentice shivered as he imagined these scenarios unfolding. One misstep, one careless gesture, and history could be altered in ways none intended. Yet the elders emphasized a subtle truth. Danger was inseparable from progress. The scroll's power came with risk, and only by navigating both could knowledge endure and guide wisely. The apprentice observed his own fear transforming into cautious vigilance. Every shadow, every distant movement became a point of focus, a possible threat or clue. He saw how the Magi had honed their senses to detect subtle signs, traces of human presence, footprints in unlikely patterns, smoke from fires that should not exist. These observations were more than survival tactics. They were lessons in discernment, teaching the apprentice that perception was as vital as knowledge itself. To understand the scrolls, one had to understand the world around them, including its dangers and the motives of those who sought what they protected. Tensions rose subtly over the following days. The caravan passed through narrow passes where ambushes could occur unnoticed, and across open plains where distant watchers could observe their movements. The apprentice learned the delicate balance the Magi maintained between vigilance and stealth. They never overreacted, but neither did they underestimate threats. Even minor anomalies, a displaced stone, an unusual pattern in the sand, a whisper of movement in the distance, were enough to prompt careful reassessment of routes and timing. Each decision weighed heavily. The wrong choice could expose the scrolls or the caravan to danger that might have consequences far beyond the desert. One evening, as the sun dipped below distant mountains, the apprentice saw figures moving with alarming speed across a ridge. They were mounted, equipped with weapons, and clearly organized. The Magi's expressions hardened, a signal that the threats were real and imminent. Yet there was no panic, only deliberate, precise preparation. The apprentice felt his pulse quicken, knowing that the safety of centuries of knowledge rested in their hands, and that the margin for error was minimal. The desert had protected them thus far, but human cunning was proving a far greater challenge than wind, sand, or heat. The Magi also emphasized subtlety over confrontation. They did not wish to draw attention to themselves, understanding that the value of the scrolls was in their secrecy. The apprentice began to grasp the wisdom in their approach. Power revealed too soon, even for the noblest purpose, could be catastrophic. The scroll's protection was not only about defending the texts physically. It was about controlling the timing and circumstances under which knowledge entered the world. A premature revelation could ignite conflicts, inspire greed, or destabilize regions. Understanding this made the apprentice acutely aware that their journey was as much about discipline and moral judgment as it was about endurance and observation. Even as the threats became more tangible, the apprentice felt a surge of determination. The pursuit of knowledge had always been fraught with danger, and the stories he had heard, the disappearances, the madness, the vanished scholars, were part of a continuum that now included him. The caravan's path was not only a physical journey, but a moral and intellectual one, testing courage, patience, and the ability to act wisely under pressure. The apprentice understood that the scrolls themselves were not passive. They demanded guardianship, vigilance, and discernment. Every misstep could be irreversible. And so, as the caravan pressed on, the apprentice carried with him a sharpened awareness of the dangers that lurked beyond the dunes. Rival factions, spies, and opportunists were part of the world outside the desert's protective embrace, and the Magi's mission was to shield their knowledge from such forces. The apprentice realized that their journey was no longer just a test of endurance. It was a battle of wits, patience, and perception. Each day brought new lessons, and each night reinforced the understanding that secrecy and vigilance were the first line of defense for the wisdom that had survived centuries. By the flickering firelight that night, the apprentice reflected on the delicate balance of their journey. The scrolls were more than historical artifacts. They were catalysts, capable of influencing nations and reshaping human understanding. Protecting them required courage, discipline, and foresight. The desert had been a formidable guardian, but now human ambition tested their vigilance. And as the apprentice stared into the dancing flames, one thought lingered, echoing in the silence of the night. Knowledge is a treasure, but when sought by the unworthy, it becomes a weapon, and the desert alone cannot defend it. The desert, which had seemed an ally in their journey, now revealed its dual nature, both protector and witness. As the caravan advanced, the distant figures that had been observed from afar became more deliberate, their intentions clear. Rival factions, scholars driven by obsession, and opportunistic mercenaries had begun to converge on the caravan's route. The Magi moved with urgent precision, adjusting pace, shifting campsites, and subtly altering paths to avoid detection. Every decision carried weight. Every misstep could result in catastrophe. The apprentice felt a growing tension, realizing that the desert was no longer just a landscape to traverse, but a stage on which human ambition and knowledge collided. That morning, scouts reported movement along the ridge, riders silhouetted against the rising sun. The caravan halted, blending with the shadows as the Magi assessed the situation. The apprentice watched the elders communicate silently, gestures precise, eyes alert. No words were necessary. Years of experience had honed their instincts to near perfection. He observed a pattern. The Magi were always thinking several steps ahead, anticipating not only immediate threats, but potential strategies the pursuers might employ. The scrolls they carried were far too valuable to risk in an open confrontation. Survival depended on cunning, patience, and the disciplined application of knowledge. The pursuit escalated over the next few days. The apprentice noticed subtle signs of the rivals' presence. Footprints partially obscured by shifting sand, dust clouds on distant ridges, and faint glimpses of banners and symbols unfamiliar to the caravan. The desert that had once seemed silent now thrummed with the tension of unseen observers. The Magi moved with near-military precision, creating diversions and altering routes to mislead those who sought the scrolls. The apprentice felt the pressure of responsibility growing. Every step forward was fraught with risk, and the fate of centuries of knowledge depended on their ability to navigate both terrain and human cunning. At night, the caravan set up a temporary camp behind a natural outcropping. Fires were low, barely flickering, and movements were deliberately slow and silent. The apprentice listened to the whispers of the elders as they planned the next phase of their journey. Strategy was paramount. They could not engage directly, for the scrolls were too precious and their opponents too unpredictable. Instead, they relied on intelligence, observation, and subtle misdirection. The apprentice absorbed every detail, understanding that the Magi's genius lay not only in their preservation of knowledge, but in their ability to outthink and outmaneuver those who sought to exploit it. One evening, the apprentice witnessed a narrow escape that left him shaken. A rival scout had nearly stumbled upon the caravan's hidden path, only to be diverted by a carefully arranged illusion. Small trails, strategically placed objects, and dust patterns that led the observer astray. The Magi's calm, deliberate approach was mesmerizing. The apprentice realized that the scroll's survival depended as much on psychological insight as on physical vigilance. The desert itself became an extension of the Magi's strategy, manipulated subtly to conceal, protect, and mislead. The interplay between human perception and natural terrain fascinated and terrified him. The chase intensified as the caravan approached a series of jagged cliffs. Narrow passes and sudden drops created natural choke points, dangerous for both pursuers and protectors. The apprentice felt a surge of adrenaline as the Magi guided the group carefully, knowing that even the slightest mistake could expose them. The cliffs offered both opportunity and peril, a perfect place to lose pursuers, but also a deadly trap if misjudged. Every maneuver required precision, courage, and discipline, reinforcing the lessons that had been repeated since the apprentice first encountered the scrolls. Knowledge demands respect, and survival requires both intellect and instinct. During one particularly tense afternoon, the apprentice observed a confrontation from a distance. Rival factions had split into smaller units, attempting to encircle the caravan. The Magi, anticipating this, had already set subtle obstacles, loose stones, narrow paths, and natural decoys that forced the pursuers to reveal themselves without knowing it. The apprentice marveled at the elders' calm precision. They did not engage recklessly. They let strategy, foresight, and controlled manipulation dictate the outcome. In every action, there was a lesson. Knowledge could not only protect itself, but could shape events invisibly, influencing outcomes without direct confrontation. As night fell, the tension in the caravan reached its peak. Scouts confirmed that the rivals were still nearby, circling cautiously, wary of traps they could not perceive. The apprentice understood the delicate balance. Exposure could invite disaster, but overcaution could stall the journey. The Magi navigated this tension with subtle brilliance, moving through the desert with stealth, creating false trails, and guiding the caravan along paths known only to the guardians. The apprentice felt both exhilaration and fear. The scrolls were not mere artifacts. They were catalysts capable of influencing not only thought but action, strategy, and even destiny itself. In the quiet moments, the apprentice reflected on the stakes. Knowledge, preserved through centuries and across continents, had become a target, and the caravan's survival depended on the seamless integration of intellect, discipline, and instinct. Every rival, every shadow, every subtle trace in the sand reminded him that the world beyond the desert was not neutral. Ambition, greed, and curiosity could drive men to extremes, and the Magi's mission was to ensure that understanding, not destruction, prevailed. The weight of history pressed down on the apprentice, but it also inspired him. He realized that guardianship of knowledge was both a burden and a calling, a path defined by courage, patience, and unwavering moral judgment. By dawn, the rival factions had been successfully diverted, lured into decoys and false trails laid by the Magi. The caravan moved silently, its path undetected, though the apprentice knew that this was only one battle in a much longer journey. Every day brought new lessons, new tests, and new risks. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and growing determination. The scrolls, delicate yet powerful, had survived another threat, and the apprentice understood more clearly than ever the precarious balance between preservation and danger. And as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the dunes, the apprentice pondered a sobering truth that had become increasingly clear. Knowledge can illuminate, inspire, and transform, but it can also incite obsession, greed, and conflict. Protecting it requires vigilance, wisdom, and courage, for the world is full of those who would misuse even the most precious truths. The scroll that the Magi had chosen for study that night was unlike any the apprentice had encountered. Its surface was delicate, the parchment thin and nearly translucent, etched with symbols and diagrams that seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight. The elders approached it with reverence, their hands steady, their eyes reflecting decades of experience and understanding. The apprentice felt a mix of awe and apprehension. He understood that this was not merely a text to be read. It was a gateway to knowledge, an artifact carrying the weight of centuries, demanding careful attention and respect. As the elders began their work, the apprentice observed the meticulous methods they employed. They traced symbols with soft brushes, illuminated sections with lanterns to avoid damage, and consulted cross-references from other fragments stored within their packs. The scroll contained not just words, but diagrams of astronomical phenomena, philosophical principles, and coded annotations hinting at strategies for understanding the natural world. Each detail required patience, precision, and the ability to perceive subtle connections invisible to the untrained eye. The apprentice felt the thrill of discovery, tempered by a deep awareness of responsibility. A misinterpretation could distort understanding for generations. The text spoke of patterns, celestial alignments, natural cycles, and the interplay between human action and cosmic events. The apprentice realized that the Magi had recorded knowledge that bridged observation and philosophy, science and morality. Each line was a lesson, each symbol a test of comprehension. The elders guided the apprentice carefully, explaining subtle nuances without revealing the full depth too quickly. This method of teaching emphasized patience and reflection, cultivating an understanding that extended beyond the scroll itself. The apprentice felt a growing awareness of how knowledge could shape perception, guiding decisions not only in science, but in governance, ethics, and human behavior. What struck him most was the subtle interplay between East and West embedded in the scroll. Annotations in a foreign script referenced principles familiar to Western scholars, yet presented through a lens shaped by centuries of Eastern observation and philosophy. The scroll served as a bridge, revealing how civilizations had exchanged ideas quietly, deliberately, and with profound consequences. The apprentice understood that the Magi's role had never been merely custodial. They had actively facilitated the subtle integration of Eastern insights into Western thought, guiding the evolution of knowledge across continents. Hours passed in silence, punctuated only by the careful rustle of parchment and the soft murmur of explanations. The apprentice felt a sense of reverence he had never experienced before. The scroll was alive in a way that transcended its physical form. It was a vessel of thought, imagination, and foresight. The elders encouraged the apprentice to trace the lines, to contemplate the relationships between symbols, and to consider the broader implications of each diagram. Every action was deliberate, every gesture a lesson in understanding the interconnectedness of knowledge, history, and human action. The scroll revealed insights into the natural world that seemed almost prophetic. It described cycles of seasons, patterns of rainfall, and celestial events with a precision that rivaled modern observation. The apprentice realized that the Magi had recorded empirical knowledge alongside philosophical reflection, blending practical utility with moral consideration. The text suggested that understanding the universe required more than measurement and calculation. It required contemplation, humility, and an awareness of the consequences of human intervention. The apprentice felt a profound connection to those ancient minds, as if their curiosity, discipline, and insight had reached across time to guide him. Yet with the excitement of discovery came a sense of peril. The apprentice remembered the tales of scholars who had been consumed by their obsession with the scrolls, losing their sanity or their lives in pursuit of understanding. He felt the weight of history pressing on him. The knowledge in his hands was not merely academic. It was potent, capable of influencing decisions, shaping societies, and altering the course of events. The Magi's guidance was essential, their experience a safeguard against the seduction of brilliance unchecked by caution. The apprentice understood that wisdom was inseparable from responsibility, and that the true lesson of the scroll extended beyond knowledge itself. As the night deepened, the apprentice began to grasp the philosophical dimension embedded in the text. The scroll suggested that knowledge was a mirror, reflecting not only the external world, but the inner state of the seeker. To comprehend its full meaning, one had to cultivate patience, self-discipline, and moral clarity. The apprentice realized that the Magi's methods, their careful selection of students, measured exposure to fragments, and insistence on ethical reflection were designed to prepare minds for insights that could otherwise overwhelm. The scroll, he understood, was both a teacher and a test, revealing the power and danger of understanding. The elders also revealed the subtle historical implications embedded in the scroll. Patterns described in its diagrams hinted at the influence of Eastern thought on Western advancements, from navigation and astronomy to philosophy and governance. The apprentice felt a surge of awe. The scroll was not just a repository of abstract knowledge. It was a testament to the quiet shaping of civilizations, a hidden hand guiding human progress across continents and centuries. The apprentice understood that his journey was not merely about preservation. It was about participating in this continuum of influence, understanding both the past and its implications for the future. By the early hours of dawn, the apprentice had internalized a crucial realization. Knowledge without context, discipline, and ethical reflection could be as dangerous as ignorance. The scroll illuminated not only what had been discovered, but how discovery should be approached, interpreted, and applied. The elders' guidance was essential in translating these lessons into actionable insight, ensuring that understanding did not outpace wisdom. The apprentice felt a profound respect for the Magi's centuries of preparation and foresight, recognizing that the preservation of knowledge required far more than careful storage. It required mentorship, moral guidance, and the cultivation of character. As the first light of morning filtered into the desert camp, the apprentice felt a quiet exhilaration. The scroll had revealed glimpses of a world shaped by observation, contemplation, and deliberate integration of insights across cultures. He understood that the journey ahead would be as much about internal growth as external discovery, demanding both courage and restraint. The Magi had entrusted him with fragments of civilization itself, and in doing so had challenged him to rise to the responsibility of stewardship. The apprentice knew that each step forward would test his intellect, patience, and moral clarity in ways he could not yet fully anticipate. And as he gazed at the scroll one final time before it was carefully returned to its protective case, the apprentice reflected on the profound lesson it had imparted. Knowledge is not merely to be acquired. It is to be understood, respected, and integrated with wisdom, for it shapes not only what we know, but who we become. The desert was merciless, yet the greatest threat came not from sandstorms or a scorching sun, but from within. The apprentice had begun to sense subtle tensions among the caravan members, fleeting glances, whispered exchanges, and unexplained hesitations. Trust, the very foundation of their mission, was fragile. The Magi, though ever vigilant, relied on a careful network of allies, But even the most disciplined guardians could be blindsided by human ambition or fear. The apprentice felt a growing unease. Knowledge, powerful and delicate, had a way of drawing out the hidden desires and weaknesses in those who sought proximity to it. The betrayal revealed itself in small, almost imperceptible ways. A map subtly altered, a message left unsigned, a delayed warning about a shifting sand dune. Each act seemed minor, yet together they formed a pattern the Magi immediately recognized. The apprentice's heart raced as he realized the implications. Someone within the caravan was compromising the journey. The elders moved with silent efficiency, their eyes sharp and their gestures controlled, signaling for the group to maintain calm while the betrayer was identified. The tension was suffocating, a silent pressure that forced every member to examine their loyalties and intentions. The apprentice observed the careful strategy employed by the Magi to manage the situation. They did not confront the suspect openly, knowing that panic could jeopardize both the scrolls and the caravan. Instead, they relied on observation, subtle questioning, and deliberate tests to reveal truth without alerting the betrayer. The apprentice watched as a series of small traps and diversions were deployed, paths altered, responsibilities reassigned, information monitored. Each action was a blend of patience and precision, a lesson in both strategy and human psychology. The Magi's vigilance was a reminder that knowledge, like trust, required constant protection, not only from external threats, but from those closest to it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant dunes, the betrayal reached a critical point. A rival scout was nearly led directly to their hidden camp by subtle misdirection within the caravan, a misstep that would have been catastrophic had it not been intercepted by the Magi's intervention. The apprentice felt a surge of fear and anger, but the elders remained calm, their actions deliberate. The betrayer's identity was still unknown, but the danger was now unmistakable. The apprentice realized that the survival of centuries of knowledge, meticulously preserved by the Magi, hinged not only on strategy, but on discernment of human character. The elders explained the psychology of betrayal, emphasizing the subtlety with which ambition, greed, or fear could manifest. The apprentice began to understand that the scrolls were as much a test of human virtue as a repository of wisdom. A person unprepared for the responsibility could inadvertently or intentionally expose them to ruin. He thought of past scholars and guardians who had fallen prey to obsession, pride, or avarice. The desert had tested them all, but betrayal within the caravan was uniquely insidious because it came from familiarity, trust, and shared purpose, making detection and prevention exponentially more difficult. As the caravan pressed forward cautiously, the apprentice noticed behavioral patterns, small hesitations, and inconsistencies in the suspect's actions. The Magi monitored these clues with practiced precision, maintaining composure while directing the apprentice to observe, analyze, and internalize the lessons. He began to see the subtle artistry in their approach. Confrontation was a last resort. Understanding, containment, and strategic correction were preferred. Knowledge, he realized, required not only preservation but ethical management of human impulses, a lesson as vital as any written in the scrolls themselves. The night of the reveal was tense beyond words. Under the cover of darkness, the elders subtly isolated the betrayer, guiding the individual into a scenario where deception would be revealed without endangering the caravan. The apprentice watched as patience, calculation, and moral clarity converged in a single decisive moment. The betrayer's misstep became apparent, the intent revealed, and the risk neutralized before it could manifest into disaster. The apprentice's heart raced. and he understood fully for the first time how fragile the line between success and catastrophe could be when human ambition intersected with profound knowledge. The aftermath was quiet but profound. The betrayer was confronted with the consequences of their actions, guided by the Magi to recognize the gravity of their interference. The apprentice observed the elder's approach, firm, measured, yet tempered with insight and mercy. The lesson was clear. Betrayal, while dangerous, was also an opportunity for reflection, correction, and understanding. The Magi emphasized that knowledge demanded not only physical protection, but also ethical stewardship, requiring those who engaged with it to confront their own motives and vulnerabilities. The apprentice reflected on his own role in the unfolding drama. He realized that guardianship of the scrolls was not a passive endeavor. It required constant vigilance, critical thinking, and moral clarity. Knowledge was fragile not only because of physical threats, but because of the human heart, capable of desire, fear, and error. Each decision, each observation, each subtle action within the caravan carried implications far beyond the immediate moment. The apprentice felt a deepening sense of responsibility, recognizing that his journey was as much an internal test as an external mission. By dawn, the desert was calm, the immediate threat neutralized, yet the apprentice felt the lingering weight of tension. The betrayal had served as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between trust and vigilance, freedom and control, curiosity and respect. Every member of the caravan, including the apprentice, carried the knowledge that the scrolls were not merely objects. They were living conduits of civilization, capable of inspiring greatness or unleashing destruction if mishandled. The desert had witnessed yet another trial, one that reinforced the inseparable connection between human integrity and the preservation of wisdom. As the caravan resumed its journey, the apprentice pondered the moral of the ordeal. Knowledge, the Magi had demonstrated, was not simply to be protected from external threats. It required careful stewardship of human character. Ethical vigilance, patience, and understanding were as essential as physical guardianship. Every betrayal, every misstep, every temptation was a test, revealing both the power of knowledge and the responsibility of those who carried it. The apprentice understood that the survival of wisdom depended not only on secrecy and skill, but on the cultivation of discernment, moral courage, and discipline in those who dared to engage with it. And as the first light of morning spread across the dunes, illuminating the caravan's path, the apprentice felt a renewed sense of purpose. The desert had tested them again, the betrayer had been revealed, and the scrolls remained secure. Yet he knew that the journey was far from over. Knowledge, once uncovered, carried both illumination and peril, and the Magi's guardianship required vigilance that would never cease. The lesson lingered in his mind, echoing across the sands and the silent night. Wisdom is a treasure, but it demands constant vigilance, ethical clarity, and the courage to confront both human ambition and one's own limitations. The first rays of sunlight painted the desert in gold and crimson, illuminating the caravan as it pressed onward, each step carrying the weight of history. The apprentice felt a quiet anticipation, for today the Magi had chosen a scroll for him to study personally. Unlike the previous fragments, this one was a revelation of the mind, a text that bridged philosophy, mathematics, and natural observation in ways that challenged the boundaries of conventional thought. The apprentice approached it with reverence, aware that the scroll had the power to transform understanding, but only if approached with patience and insight. The scroll's content was intricate, weaving together complex ideas with visual diagrams that seemed to pulsate with meaning. The apprentice traced lines and symbols with his fingers, feeling a strange resonance as though the knowledge itself were alive, responding to his attention. The text revealed principles of mechanics and motion, concepts of equilibrium, and insights into the natural order that had the potential to advance civilizations. Yet its value was not merely technical. Embedded within were reflections on human responsibility, ethical application, and the consequences of misinterpretation. Each observation demanded not just comprehension, but reflection, blending intellect with moral clarity. The Magi guided the apprentice gently, pointing out subtle nuances without revealing everything at once. Their teaching emphasized synthesis, understanding connections between observations, drawing conclusions responsibly, and recognizing the broader implications of discovery. The apprentice realized that this scroll was a masterclass not only in knowledge but in wisdom. It taught that insight without discipline could be dangerous, and that understanding must always be tempered by ethical awareness. The text demanded humility, patience, and a willingness to question assumptions, a lesson the Magi conveyed with quiet authority. Hours passed as the apprentice immersed himself in the scroll. He discovered hidden patterns linking celestial movement to natural cycles, hints at early engineering principles, and philosophical annotations suggesting that human action must be guided by awareness of consequence. Each revelation carried both awe and responsibility. The apprentice began to see how knowledge, once possessed, could shape society, guide rulers, and influence events far beyond the immediate moment. The scroll was not static. It was a living map of human understanding, a bridge connecting observation, theory, and ethical reflection across centuries. The apprentice marveled at the integration of East and West within the scroll. Mathematical concepts familiar to Western scholars were presented through Eastern observational techniques and philosophical reasoning. The text revealed the subtle ways civilizations had influenced each other, often quietly, through shared curiosity and careful preservation. The apprentice felt a deep sense of connection to these ancient minds, recognizing that knowledge was not the property of a single culture, but a tapestry woven through human endeavor, each fragment a testament to collaboration, observation, and insight. As he delved deeper, the apprentice noticed a theme recurring throughout the scroll: the balance of power and responsibility. The diagrams, equations, and annotations repeatedly emphasized that understanding without discipline could lead to error or catastrophe. The Magi had chosen this particular fragment for him not merely to expand intellect, but to teach judgment, patience, and ethical reasoning. The apprentice realized that the scroll's true purpose was to cultivate character as well as knowledge, reinforcing a lesson he had glimpsed in previous sections of his journey. The guardianship of wisdom was inseparable from the cultivation of virtue. Late into the afternoon, the apprentice experienced a breakthrough. A complex series of diagrams depicting celestial alignments, water flow, and mechanical motion suddenly revealed an elegant coherence. He understood not only the technical principles, but their philosophical implications. The universe operated through patterns, balance, and interdependence. Every action had consequences, every decision a ripple effect across time and space. The realization left him breathless. Knowledge, he understood, was more than accumulation. It was insight, foresight, and the ability to perceive the threads that connected seemingly disparate phenomena. Yet exhilaration was tempered by a sense of caution. The apprentice remembered the desert, the betrayals, and the rival factions that sought the scrolls for their own ends. Knowledge was power, but it was also dangerous. The apprentice realized that the scroll he held was not merely an artifact. It was a responsibility, a living legacy of civilization that demanded discernment and care. Misuse or premature revelation could ignite ambition, conflict, or misunderstanding, altering the course of societies in unpredictable ways. The Magi had entrusted him with both a privilege and a burden, and he felt the weight keenly. The elders observed quietly, offering guidance only when necessary, allowing the apprentice to draw conclusions independently. Their patience was a lesson in itself. Wisdom could not be forced. It had to be earned through attentive study, reflection, and moral consideration. The apprentice began to internalize a deeper truth. Knowledge was inseparable from its human context. To understand the scroll fully was not only to grasp its technical content, but to appreciate the ethical and philosophical responsibilities it entailed. The lesson extended beyond the desert, beyond the caravan, into the very fabric of human civilization. By the end of the day, the apprentice felt a profound shift within himself. The scroll had revealed not just principles of motion, alignment, and equilibrium, but insights into judgment, foresight, and the subtle interplay between knowledge and action. He recognized that wisdom required more than intellect. It demanded humility, patience, and a deep awareness of consequences. The Magi had orchestrated a carefully guided revelation, ensuring that comprehension was balanced with ethical understanding. The apprentice felt both empowered and humbled, aware of the transformative potential of the scroll and the responsibilities it entailed. As the sun set behind distant dunes, casting long shadows across the caravan, the apprentice reflected on the magnitude of what he had learned. The scroll had bridged time, culture, and thought, revealing connections between civilizations and illuminating the delicate balance between understanding and application. He realized that his journey was not only about transporting knowledge, but about internalizing it, becoming a vessel capable of perceiving, safeguarding, and applying wisdom responsibly. The desert, with all its trials, betrayals, and revelations, had become a classroom of both intellect and character. And as the night fell and stars emerged above the desert expanse, the apprentice held the scroll gently, contemplating the lessons it carried. Knowledge illuminates, but without humility, patience, and ethical reflection, it can consume. Wisdom is not merely the accumulation of facts. It is the understanding of responsibility, the foresight to anticipate consequences, and the courage to act rightly even when no one watches. Night deepened across the desert, a vast ocean of silence broken only by the wind whispering over dunes. The caravan settled, its fires flickering against the dark horizon, casting golden halos on faces drawn by exhaustion and wonder. The apprentice could not sleep. The day's revelations from the scroll still burned in his mind, their patterns echoing like celestial rhythms. He walked to the edge of the encampment, where the dunes seemed to breathe beneath starlight, and there he saw one of the Magi waiting, an elder known for his silence and piercing gaze. Without a word, the old man motioned for him to follow. They descended into a narrow ravine where the sand gave way to rock, carved by centuries of wind and hidden from the untrained eye. The air was colder here, denser, filled with a faint scent of incense and age. The elder carried a small lamp, its flames steady despite the wind, and its light revealed faint inscriptions along the walls, ancient etchings that glowed faintly, as if responding to the firelight. The apprentice recognized the symbols. They matched fragments he had seen in the scroll earlier that day. This place, he realized, was no mere shelter. It was one of the Magi's oldest sanctuaries, a repository of living memory. At the heart of the chamber stood a stone altar, weathered but unbroken. Around it were vessels of bronze and clay, filled with powders and oils, each labeled in a script that bridged languages. The mark of a culture that once unified East and West in shared reverence for knowledge. The elder placed the lamp upon the altar and withdrew a sealed bundle from beneath his robe. It was a scroll, older than any the apprentice had seen, its wrapping frayed yet carefully preserved. The elder's hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he was about to reveal. This, the elder said softly, is the ritual of illumination. It was not meant for all eyes. Only those who have seen beyond the surface of knowledge can grasp what it means. He began to unroll it, the parchment sighing as if exhaling centuries of secrecy. The ink shimmered faintly in the light, composed of rare minerals that had resisted time. The apprentice leaned closer, his breath shallow, his mind already alive with questions. The text described a ceremony that once united the Magi of the East with philosophers of the West, a ritual performed at the convergence of celestial alignments. It was said to unlock not supernatural power, but a heightened state of awareness, where perception deepened and boundaries between intuition and reason dissolved. The ritual, according to legend, had been performed only thrice in recorded history. Once in Babylon, once in Alexandria, and once in a hidden monastery in the mountains of Persia before vanishing into myth. The apprentice's pulse quickened as the elder translated softly. The ritual required no idols, no sacrifices, only alignment of stars, of mind, of moral intent. Participants prepared for days through fasting and meditation, purifying their senses until they could perceive the invisible harmony between thought and motion, sound and silence. The scroll described the process with mathematical precision, geometric arrangements of flame, intervals of chanting based on planetary cycles, and a precise orientation toward constellations long forgotten by modern astronomy. As the elder read, the chamber seemed to hum faintly. The air shifted, alive with unseen energy. The apprentice felt the fine hairs on his arms rise. It was as though the ritual, even dormant, remembered itself. The elder smiled faintly, recognizing the sensation. Knowledge, he whispered, retains its memory when kept in reverence. The text continued, detailing the ritual's deeper purpose. It was designed to align the human spirit with the principles of cosmic balance, a metaphor for how wisdom must mirror the order of creation. But the most startling revelation came in the final stanza, a warning. The ritual could not be performed in greed or ambition. Those who attempted it without purity of intention would face dissonance, a fracturing of perception leading to confusion and despair. Knowledge, it seemed, demanded not only intellect, but purity of heart. The apprentice understood, then, why the ritual had been lost. In times of conquest and greed, when empires sought to possess wisdom as property, the Magi had chosen to conceal it. Better for such insight to vanish than to be weaponized. The elder's voice trembled as he spoke these lines, his tone carrying both sorrow and reverence. Our ancestors hid this truth, not to keep it from humanity, but to preserve humanity from itself. He gestured for the apprentice to kneel. Together, they lit a small circle of lamps around the altar, their flames forming a pattern resembling the constellations drawn in the scroll. The elder began to chant in an ancient dialect, a tone that resonated in the bones rather than the ear. The apprentice joined softly, his voice uncertain but growing steadier as the rhythm took hold. The room seemed to pulse with invisible symmetry. Shadows danced along the carved walls in patterns of mathematical grace. For a brief moment, the apprentice felt an expansion of awareness unlike anything he had known. He sensed motion in stillness, sound in silence, and the subtle pulse of energy that linked all living things. The ritual's truth was not magic. It was comprehension. It unveiled the unseen structure of existence, the balance between reason and wonder, discipline and intuition. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized the magnitude of what the scroll truly offered. Not domination, but harmony. Not control, but unity. When the final lamp flickered out, the elder placed a hand on the apprentice's shoulder. "Now you understand why we guard these scrolls," he said. "They are not weapons of power. They are mirrors of conscience. Every civilization that forgets this truth dooms itself to repeat its errors." The words hung heavy in the cool air, and the apprentice felt the full gravity of his journey settling upon him. The desert, the caravan, the hidden scrolls, all of it had led to this moment of comprehension. They left the sanctuary in silence. The stars above the ravine burned brighter than before, and for the first time, the apprentice felt their patterns not as distant fires, but as reflections of an inner order. The ritual had awakened something within him, a realization that knowledge and morality were not separate paths, but two halves of the same journey. As the elder extinguished the final lamp, he whispered, "Remember this night. The world beyond these sands has forgotten balance. One day, you may have to remind them." The apprentice looked back once at the sealed chamber, now swallowed by darkness, and felt an ache in his chest, a blend of awe, fear, and destiny. He knew that what he had witnessed could not remain buried forever. The lost ritual was more than a ceremony. It was a philosophy, a map for how wisdom must be lived, not merely studied. And as dawn began to break once more across the endless desert, the apprentice understood. The scrolls were not just relics of the past. They were instructions for the future. The following morning broke in uneasy silence. The wind had shifted, bringing with it a scent that did not belong to the desert, a faint tang of smoke and metal. The caravan stirred restlessly, animals stamping and snorting as if sensing danger before the humans did. The apprentice emerged from his tent, still haunted by the vision from the ritual, but his reverie was cut short by the sight of the horizon. Far in the distance, thin spirals of dust twisted skyward, too steady, too deliberate to be natural. Riders. The Magi had noticed too. Their leader, a man of few words but commanding presence, stood beside a low dune, his robes fluttering like wings in the rising wind. His eyes narrowed as he studied the horizon. "They've found us," he murmured, his tone neither fearful nor surprised. "The seekers of shadow." The apprentice's pulse quickened. He had heard whispers of them before. Scholars turned mercenaries, fanatics who hunted the scrolls not for wisdom, but for leverage. They believed that whoever controlled the lost knowledge could command nations. Orders were given quickly. The caravan's layout shifted with practiced efficiency. Packs rearranged, routes altered, fires doused. The Magi moved in silence, their composure steady even under threat. The apprentice, however, felt the familiar tremor of fear rise in his chest. The ritual had taught him balance, yet here, under the harsh weight of daylight and danger, that balance faltered. He struggled to reconcile the serenity of last night's revelation with the raw urgency of survival. By noon, the dust clouds had grown closer, their edges shimmering with the heat. Through a spyglass, the apprentice caught sight of riders, black robes, gleaming metal, banners marked with sigils unknown to him. Their formation was tight, purposeful. They were not wanderers or thieves. They were trained. The Magi decided to change direction, leading the caravan toward a canyon where cliffs could conceal them. It was a perilous path, but the only one that offered cover. The apprentices and guards packed in silence, the air thick with tension. As they entered the canyon, the world narrowed to stone and shadow. The cliffs rose on either side, towering walls etched with ancient markings. The sound of hooves and the rattle of harnesses echoed eerily, amplified by the enclosed space. The Magi whispered prayers, not for victory, but for guidance. Every movement carried intention, every silence meaning. The apprentice walked close to his mentor, his hand instinctively resting near the satchel that held the newly studied scroll. It was more than parchment now. It was purpose, memory, and weight. Then came the first sign that they were not alone. A single echo, too sharp, too distinct, cut through the wind. The apprentice froze. Another sound followed, the faint clink of metal against stone. The Magi exchanged glances. Without words, the guards fanned out, their eyes searching the cliffs. A shadow moved high above, then another. Before the caravan could react, the first arrow struck, embedding itself in the sand inches from a camel's hoof. Chaos erupted. The riders have found them. Figures appeared along the canyon rim, their silhouettes framed by sunlight. Arrows rained down in controlled volleys, not to kill, but to scatter. The Magi shouted commands, their voices steady amid the confusion. The apprentice ducked behind a rock, his heart pounding. He saw his mentor lift a hand and utter a phrase, not magic but an ancient signal. Instantly, the guards formed a defensive circle around the scroll bearers. The discipline was astonishing, each movement rehearsed through generations of guardianship. The apprentice clutched his satchel, his fingers trembling. The air filled with dust, screams, and the hiss of arrows. Through it all, he caught glimpses of the attackers, faces obscured, eyes cold with determination. They were not raiders seeking wealth. They were seekers of forbidden truth. One of them called out in a language the apprentice only partly understood. Hand over the knowledge. It belongs to all. The words echoed through the canyon, twisted by the cliffs into accusation and irony. The Magi refused. Instead, they began retreating deeper into the canyon, moving toward a narrow passage that curved sharply to the east. The apprentice followed, his lungs burning, his thoughts a storm of fear and disbelief. Each step felt heavier, each breath sharper. The canyon seemed to close in around them, its ancient walls whispering with the ghosts of civilizations past. In flashes of sunlight through dust, he thought he saw inscriptions, fragments of languages that had shaped empires and vanished. It was as if history itself watched silently, bearing witness to the struggle for its own preservation. As the caravan neared the bend, a sudden collapse of rock sealed the passage behind them. The attackers had triggered it, trapping them. Panic surged, but the Magi's leader remained composed. He pointed toward a crevice barely visible among the rocks. "Through there," he said, "it leads to the old sanctuary." The apprentice hesitated. He remembered that name from the scrolls. The sanctuary was a place of exile, a last refuge for the guardians in times of great peril. Few had ever reached it. Fewer had returned. They pressed onward through the narrow opening. Darkness swallowed them. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of minerals and earth. Behind them, the echoes of pursuit faded, replaced by the slow drip of water and the quiet hum of the subterranean world. The apprentice's breathing steadied as he adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks above. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting and splitting like veins beneath the desert. Occasionally, faint carvings glimmered on the walls, symbols of guidance left by those who had come before. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged into a vast underground chamber. Stalactites hung like frozen lightning, and a subterranean river glowed faintly in the torchlight. The Magi set down their packs, their movements reverent. "We are beneath the ruins of Hatra," the leader said softly, "an ancient city built where faith and reason once met. Here, the scrolls were first divided." The apprentice looked around in awe. The cavern was not empty. It held remnants of statues, altars, and broken tablets. History lay scattered like forgotten dreams. The Magi began to speak among themselves in low tones. Plans were made, decisions weighed. The apprentice sat near the river, exhaustion washing over him. His reflection shimmered in the water, distorted but familiar. He thought of the ritual, the balance it had taught him, and how fragile that balance now seemed. Above ground, men fought for control of wisdom. Below, its guardians sought only to preserve it. As he listened to the quiet murmurs of the Magi, he understood that this confrontation was not the end, but a prelude. The seekers would not stop. The scroll's power was too alluring, their potential too vast. The apprentice realized, with both dread and resolve, that their journey had crossed from discovery into survival. The pursuit of knowledge had become a battle for its soul. And in the silent echo of that realization, the cavern itself seemed to whisper, a voice older than civilization, older than memory. Those who seek light must first pass through shadow. The underground chamber stretched before them like a cathedral carved by the earth itself. The faint glow from their torches revealed columns of stone rising from the ground to meet the ceiling in sweeping arches, each etched with ancient inscriptions. The air was thick and cool, carrying the faint metallic scent of age and stillness. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the most seasoned of the Magi seemed awed by what lay before them. The apprentice felt as though they had stepped into the lungs of the world, a sacred space where the planet itself remembered. Their leader moved slowly across the cavern, tracing his fingers over the carvings. "This is the sanctuary of Hatra," he whispered, his voice echoing softly. "Built by those who understood that knowledge must sometimes hide itself to survive." The apprentice followed him, his torchlight flickering over walls covered in symbols. They were unlike anything he had seen before, a fusion of languages and iconography. Mesopotamian cuneiform interwoven with Greek geometry and fragments of Sanskrit verse. Each symbol seemed to hum faintly in the air, vibrating with meaning just beyond comprehension. The Magi began their work methodically, unrolling parchment, sketching, recording every line. Their murmurs filled the space like a prayer of intellect. The apprentice's eyes caught a mural partially concealed by dust, a vast circular map depicting a series of interconnected cities surrounded by celestial constellations. At its center stood 3 figures holding scrolls aloft, their faces obscured by halos of flame. Beneath them, an inscription in a forgotten tongue seemed to pulse faintly, as though waiting to be read aloud. The apprentice called to his mentor, who studied the mural carefully. "This," the elder said after a pause, "tells of the covenant of flame." He gestured to the circle of cities. These were the centers of ancient learning: Babylon, Alexandria, Taxila, and Ephesus. Each held a fragment of the scrolls, entrusted to different guardians. When the world grew too divided, the fragments were scattered to ensure survival. His expression darkened, and so began the age of silence. The apprentice felt a chill despite the still air. The covenant of flame, it was a story whispered among the younger students of the Magi, dismissed by many as allegory. Yet here, painted in pigment that had endured centuries, was proof. The Magi had not merely guarded the scrolls. They had orchestrated their concealment, sacrificing unity for preservation. The apprentice realized that this was the moment when humanity chose to forget itself, dividing wisdom into fragments so that power could never again be concentrated in a single hand. He turned his torch toward the opposite wall, where more carvings emerged. These were different, rougher, hurried, etched by trembling hands. They depicted scenes of destruction, libraries burning, temples collapsing, scrolls carried away under moonlight. Between the images, smaller inscriptions ran like veins, connecting one scene to another. The apprentice could almost hear the voices of those who had carved them, desperate to preserve memory even as their world crumbled. He felt a lump rise in his throat. These were not just records, they were confessions. As he studied the inscriptions, one line caught his eye. It was written in old Aramaic, barely visible beneath a layer of mineral dust. He brushed it gently, revealing the phrase, "The true flame is not in the scroll, but in the seeker." The words hit him like a revelation. He whispered them aloud, and the chamber seemed to respond. The torches flickered, shadows shifted. The Magi turned toward him. "What did you say?" his mentor asked. He repeated it, his voice trembling slightly. The elder closed his eyes, nodding slowly. "It was the creed of the First Order," he said softly. "The idea that the scrolls themselves are merely vessels. The true enlightenment lies in the one who studies with purity of purpose." It was their warning to future generations, to us. The apprentice felt the truth of it settle deep within. All their journeys, their sacrifices, their battles, it was never about the physical scrolls alone. The knowledge they carried was alive only through those who approached it with humility and integrity. The scrolls were mirrors, reflecting the soul of their reader. If approached with greed, they corrupted. If studied with reverence, they illuminated. While they pondered the words, one of the Magi called out from across the chamber, "There's something beneath the mural." They gathered as he brushed away layers of dust to reveal a small, circular opening carved into the stone floor. Its edges were inscribed with protective seals in multiple languages. The apprentice recognized some, the invocations of Asha from Zoroastrianism, the prayers of wisdom from early Hermetic texts. The convergence of these tongues hinted at cooperation between traditions long thought separate. The leader knelt and studied the seals. "It's a vault," he said, "a repository within the sanctuary." He pressed his palm to the stone, feeling for vibrations. But it's locked, not by force, but by understanding. The chamber seemed to breathe as they gathered around the bronze chest, each torch's flicker casting shifting halos across the walls. The leader of the Magi hesitated before touching the seal, his expression torn between reverence and dread. He turned toward the apprentice, the youngest among them, and said quietly, "Once opened, it cannot be undone. What we awaken here may demand more than knowledge. It may demand remembrance." His words carried a gravity that made the apprentice's heartbeat falter. But curiosity, that ancient fire of humanity, burned stronger than fear. With slow, deliberate motion, the elder pressed his palm to the lid. The engraved flame symbols began to shimmer faintly, their lines glowing as if responding to the heat of living flesh. A hum spread through the air, a resonance deep and bone-bound. The others took a cautious step back. The bronze shifted, unfolding in mechanical layers like the petals of a dying flower. Within, wrapped in brittle silk and layers of ash, lay a scroll unlike any they had ever seen. It was translucent, made of some unknown material, smoother than parchment yet flexible as cloth. Symbols floated across its surface, glowing faintly, rearranging themselves as though alive. The apprentice's breath caught. "It's changing," he whispered. The elder nodded solemnly. "It adapts to the mind that reads it." The scroll was crafted not to be read, but to reveal. The air thickened with tension. Each magus took a turn peering into the shifting script, their faces reflecting both awe and horror. The words they saw were not the same. Each man saw the language of his heart: Sumerian, Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, yet each phrase carried a meaning beyond any single tongue. It was as if the scroll spoke directly to the essence of their understanding. The elder read aloud in a low, reverent tone. "When the world forgets its song, silence will become its teacher. When silence becomes unbearable, the seekers will return, bearing the flame of memory." The apprentice felt those words pierce through him like light through glass. The flame of memory. The prophecy was not about destruction, but renewal. Humanity's exile from its own wisdom had been temporary, designed as a trial. The Magi had not failed their mission. They had preserved the possibility of awakening. The scroll's light intensified, casting long golden shadows. Images began to form in the air above it, moving symbols, constellations, and fragments of scenes. The chamber became a living archive. They saw cities rise and fall, temples built and burned, oceans swallowing coasts. Then came visions of beings, neither gods nor men, who walked among humanity, guiding its early civilizations, teaching them the rhythms of the stars, the patterns of the soul. These were the first keepers, the architects of the covenant of flame. The elder fell to his knees, tears glinting in the flicker of torchlight. "We were never the originators," he murmured. "We were the inheritors." The apprentice stood frozen, watching as the images dissolved into spirals of light. A new pattern emerged, one resembling a map, not of land, but of alignment. Lines connected sacred sites across the world, forming a network of knowledge encoded into the very geography of Earth itself. Every temple, every lost library, every monument, they were not random. They were nodes in a design older than recorded time. The realization struck the group in silence. The world's ancient wisdom was not scattered, it was synchronized. Each civilization had been a vessel for one note of the same universal harmony. Together, they formed the song of humanity's origin, a melody lost to division, to empire, to greed. The scroll pulsed once more, then dimmed. The images vanished, leaving only the sound of their collective breathing. The elder turned toward his apprentice. "Now you understand why it was hidden," he said quietly. "If one empire possessed this truth, it could claim dominion not just over men, but over meaning itself." His gaze hardened. "That is why the covenant scattered it. Knowledge must circulate like blood. If it stops in one heart, it dies." The apprentice nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of that lesson settle upon his soul. For centuries, scholars had sought the scrolls to gain mastery, to command wisdom. Yet here, standing before the original flame, he realized that true knowledge could not be possessed. It could only be embodied. It was not a weapon, but a mirror, and what it reflected depended on the seeker's intent. Then, from the shadows near the chamber's edge, one of the Magi spoke hesitantly. "There is more," he said, pointing toward an engraving on the pedestal that had gone unnoticed. The elder approached and knelt. The inscription was faint, almost erased by time. It read, "When the final reader awakens the flame, the circle will close. The lost voices will return." The elder frowned. "The final reader," he repeated. Could it mean the one who completes the understanding? Or, he paused, turning toward the apprentice, the one who begins it anew? The young man lowered his gaze, uneasy under the weight of the question. The wind outside the temple had changed. It carried a weight the apprentice could not name, an almost living pressure that seemed to follow him as he stepped into the fading light of dawn. The Magi emerged behind him, silent and pale, their robes dusted with ash from the chamber below. None spoke for a long while. The horizon burned faintly red, as if the sun itself had sensed the awakening beneath the earth. The apprentice blinked against the early light, his thoughts a storm of disbelief and wonder. The flame, whatever that meant, had entered him, yet he felt no power, no sudden enlightenment, only a disquieting hum beneath his skin, a pulse that didn't match his heartbeat. The elder approached, his face solemn. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked quietly. The apprentice hesitated, then nodded. "It's like something watching from inside me," he admitted. "Not a voice, more like a memory waiting to speak." The elder looked toward the horizon. "It will speak when you are ready to listen. The flame is not knowledge. It is remembrance. What it reveals will depend on how much of yourself you are willing to forget." The words unsettled him. Forget? What could that mean? As they began their slow descent down the mountain, the world around them felt subtly altered. The air shimmered faintly. The birds were silent. Even the stones seemed aware, resonating with a faint echo that trailed their footsteps. The Magi spoke little, lost in thought. Yet the apprentice could sense their unease. He had seen it in their eyes. The unspoken fear that the awakening of the flame was not just a revelation, but a disturbance, a signal that the long silence of the covenant was breaking. That night, as they camped among the ruins of an old caravan stop, sleep evaded him. He sat by the dwindling fire, the embers glowing like miniature suns. Every time he closed his eyes, flashes of light and sound filled his mind. Fragments of cities he had never seen, languages he had never learned, faces both human and divine. He saw towers of crystal rising from deserts, ships sailing across stars, and rituals performed under twin moons. It was as though the scroll's memories were filtering through him, seeking recognition in his mortal frame. He clutched his head, trying to steady himself. The elder, half awake, noticed the struggle and moved closer. "The visions will test you," he said softly. "Do not fight them. Let them pass through you like wind through reeds." The apprentice's breath shuddered. "It's too much. How can one mind hold this?" "You are not meant to hold it," the elder replied. "You are meant to bear witness." The words settled like a balm, though the fire within him did not calm. As dawn approached, he drifted into uneasy sleep. When he awoke, the world felt sharper, colors too vivid, sounds too layered. He could hear whispers in the rustling of the leaves, threads of meaning woven through nature itself. Every movement of the wind seemed deliberate. The flame was tuning his perception, aligning it with something ancient. The elder watched him carefully as they traveled onward. "You're changing," he observed. "The scroll is opening new senses." The apprentice frowned. "Why me? Why now?" "Because the world is forgetting faster than it can remember," the elder said. "You came to us at the turning of an age. The Western kings fight for gold. The Eastern empires chase shadows of power. The balance is breaking. Perhaps the flame has chosen you to mend what the rest of us could not." The apprentice wanted to protest, to deny the weight of such destiny, but deep within, he knew something irreversible had begun. The flame was more than energy. It was consciousness, a current that linked all who had ever sought truth. And now it flowed through him. That night, he dreamt of a great library, endless halls filled with light instead of lamps. The shelves held no books, only glowing tablets that pulsed like living hearts. A voice echoed from the darkness. The song must be remembered. He turned and saw a figure cloaked in starlight. "Who are you?" he asked. The figure's reply came like a whisper and thunder combined. I am what remains of those who came before. You are what must come after. When he awoke, tears stained his face. The dream lingered like perfume in the air. He could still feel the weight of the unseen presence, both guiding and warning him. The elder noticed. The visions grow clearer, he asked. The apprentice nodded. I saw them, the ones before us. They spoke of the song. The elder's expression darkened. The song of origins. Few remember it even by name. It was said to be the resonance that shaped creation, the sound of harmony between knowledge and spirit. The first Magi tried to preserve it through ritual, through language. But when pride took root, the song fractured and civilizations fell out of tune. The apprentice's breath caught, and the scrolls they contained the fragments. Fragments, yes, said the elder, but not the melody that lies within those who can still hear. As they journeyed westward, rumors followed them like smoke. Villages whispering of omens, lights seen over mountains, strange dreams spreading among the people. The flame's awakening was rippling outward, touching minds like wind stirring water. The elder grew worried. The covenant will feel this disturbance, he warned. Others will come seeking you, not to protect, but to control. The apprentice understood then that his path was no longer his own. He carried something the world had long buried, and now that it stirred, it would draw both guardians and predators. That night, while the others slept, he wandered beyond the camp, drawn by an unseen pull. The moon hung low and vast, its light silvering the desert stones. In the distance, he saw a faint glow, a single flame dancing atop a cairn of black rock. Approaching cautiously, he realized it was not fire, but light suspended in air, a pulse of energy that shimmered with every breath. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed the glow, his mind exploded with visions. Vast temples carved into ice, robed figures chanting before stars, and a city floating upon clouds of light. And beneath it all, the same voice whispered, "Remember the song." He gasped and fell to his knees. When he looked again, the flame had vanished. Only the echo of its warmth lingered. He returned to camp trembling, but with new understanding. The flame was not confined to him. It was awakening everywhere, in fragments scattered across the world. He was only one note in a rising chord. As dawn broke, the elder found him watching the horizon. "You've seen something," he said quietly. The apprentice nodded. "It's beginning, isn't it? The return of the song." The elder sighed, his expression both fearful and hopeful. "Yes, and when the world hears it again, it will either remember or burn." The apprentice closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the flame within him, resonating with the heartbeat of the earth. Somewhere, far to the west, he sensed movement, forces waking, old powers remembering. The next chapter of the covenant was about to begin. The first omen came with the wind. It carried a metallic tang that no one could mistake for nature's breath. The Magi stopped as the gust swept through the ravine, their torches flickering wildly before sputtering out. The apprentice felt the flame within him stir, like an animal sensing danger. Somewhere in the distance, something had changed, something vast and deliberate. The elder raised a hand for silence. From the darkness beyond the rocks came the faint echo of movement. Distant hooves, disciplined, deliberate. "Riders," murmured one of the Magi, "too organized to be merchants." The elder's expression hardened. "The covenant has felt the awakening." The apprentice frowned. "The covenant? I thought we were the covenant." "We are what remains of its true heart," the elder replied quietly. "But across the centuries, its purpose fractured. Some branches still serve the flame. Others serve only control. They will seek you now, not to protect, but to possess. The sound grew louder. In the pale moonlight, they could see a plume of dust rising from the western road. Armored silhouettes moved with precision, men bearing the mark of the serpent sun, one of the Covenant's darker sections. Their leader, it was said, believed the flame could rewrite destiny itself. "We must move," the elder commanded. "They cannot find the boy." The Magi scattered into the labyrinth of canyons, carrying torches wrapped in cloth to mute their glow. The apprentice followed closely behind, heart hammering, each step echoing with dread. The flame pulsed stronger, guiding him through the maze. He could almost see the path ahead, not with his eyes, but with something deeper. As they wound through the rocks, a shout echoed behind them. A torch flared, a warning, then a cry. One of the Magi had been found. The elder did not look back. "Keep moving," he hissed. The apprentice hesitated. "We can't just leave him." "There is no saving him now," the elder said grimly. "His sacrifice buys us time." The words struck hard, but instinct forced the apprentice onward. They climbed a narrow ledge, the wind cutting sharp against their faces. Below, the flicker of torches multiplied. The pursuers were spreading out, methodical and relentless. When they reached a high plateau, the elder stopped to catch his breath. "We must reach the sanctuary of Nippur by dawn," he said. "Only there can we invoke the seal of veiling." "What is that?" the apprentice asked, panting. "A rite older than the covenant itself," replied the elder. "It can hide what cannot be destroyed." The flame within the apprentice seemed to hum in agreement. But as he looked eastward, something unexpected caught his eye, a faint light moving across the plains, like a mirror catching moonlight. It wasn't fire. It was something colder, sharper. He pointed. "They're flanking us." The elder's face turned grim. "Then we run through the night." They pressed onward, their pace brutal, the desert stretching endlessly beneath the stars. Hours passed. The apprentice's legs burned, but the flame sustained him. At times, he thought he heard whispers in the wind, voices urging him forward, promising safety just beyond the next ridge. Yet he knew those whispers were not all friendly. Some felt heavy with deceit, like echoes of an ancient war still unresolved. By the time dawn began to stain the horizon, the sanctuary appeared, half buried in sand, its stone pillars carved with forgotten constellations. The air shimmered faintly above it, as though time itself bent around the structure. "This place," the apprentice whispered. "The first of the western sanctuaries," said the elder. "Here, the Magi of Babylon and the seers of the Nile once met under truce. Knowledge was exchanged, not for power, but for remembrance. It was here the first seal was cast, to hide the flame from empires." They hurried inside. The air was cool, filled with the scent of myrrh and dust. Shafts of light cut through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating mosaics of stars and spirals. The elder led the apprentice to the central dais, where a massive disk of black stone rested, its surface engraved with the same symbol from the scroll's final vision, the circle of flame encasing an open eye. "Stand there," the elder said. "The flame must answer its reflection." The apprentice obeyed, stepping onto the stone. The moment his foot touched the center, the engraving pulsed. Lines of light rippled outward, racing up the walls, igniting the carvings with fiery brilliance. The air vibrated. The elder began to chant in a language that seemed older than breath itself. "By the flame that forgets not its spark, by the memory that defies time, veil the bearer from the gaze of the unworthy." The ground trembled. The apprentice felt the flame inside him react, no longer passive, but alive, merging with the light spiraling around him. He could feel the stone's heartbeat beneath his feet, pulsing in rhythm with his own. The air thickened with energy. Then a scream. Outside, metal clashed against stone. The pursuers had arrived. The elder's eyes widened. Too soon, he turned toward the apprentice. "You must finish the seal." "How?" the apprentice cried. Centuries passed, and the world forgot. Empires rose, glittering and proud, only to crumble beneath the weight of their own certainty. The Magi's names faded into dust. Their symbols became curiosities carved on relics no one could decipher. The covenant fractured into legend, its echoes scattered like ashes upon the wind. Yet in hidden corners of the earth, the flame slept, not extinguished but dreaming. It stirred first in whispers. Monks in forgotten monasteries spoke of visions that came during midnight prayers, of circles of fire, of eyes that saw beyond time. Artists painted halos around men who had none. Astronomers mapped stars not visible to any telescope. Somewhere deep within humanity's soul, the memory of the flame was pushing against the walls of forgetting. In Florence, a young apprentice sketched the impossible. He was called Leonardo. He dreamed of flight, of bodies shaped like the geometry of heaven. When questioned where his ideas came from, he smiled faintly and said, "From memory." Few understood what he meant. But in his notebooks, buried between diagrams of machines and anatomy, he drew a symbol, a circle of flame encasing an open eye. In the same century, across distant Persia, the poet Jamie wrote verses of a fire hidden in every heart, longing to remember its first light. Scholars dismissed it as mysticism, yet those who read deeply knew the words were older than poetry. The flame had begun to speak again through dreamers, inventors, poets, those whose minds were open enough to receive what history had sealed away. In the shadows of cathedrals, secret brotherhoods formed. Men who called themselves custodes lucus, keepers of the light. They met under the guise of philosophical debate, but their true purpose was something older. They had inherited fragments of the covenant through the centuries, symbols, mantras, and one lingering prophecy. When the West begins to dream, the flame shall rise again. One winter's night, in a candlelit chamber beneath a Venetian library, the custodes gathered around a newly arrived relic, a stone disc unearthed near ancient Nippur. Its surface bore the familiar eye within a circle of flame. The man who brought it claimed it had been found beside a skeleton clutching a bronze medallion, the mark of the Magi. The air in the room thickened with reverence. Their leader, a scholar named Lorenzo di Rossi, traced his fingers along the engraving. "This pattern," he murmured, "it is not mere art. It is an equation." An older member frowned. "An equation of what?" "Of memory," Lorenzo replied. "Of something that once lived." That night, as the others departed, Lorenzo remained alone. The relic seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. He felt drawn to it, as though it recognized him. When he touched its center, warmth pulsed through his hand, and a vision flared before his eyes. A vast desert, a temple buried in sand, a boy standing within a circle of fire. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving him trembling. He wrote feverishly into his journal, "The flame still lives. I have seen its bearer." Over the following years, Lorenzo's obsession deepened. He began to gather texts from across the known world, fragments of Sumerian hymns, Hebrew mysticism, and early Greek alchemical scripts. Each, in its own way, spoke of the same truth, that there existed a light of knowledge older than language, a resonance shared by all creation. The church watched him with suspicion. Some whispered heresy, others called him prophet. But Lorenzo was not alone. In France, a young scholar named Nostradame wrote cryptic verses of fire returning from the east. In Prague, the alchemist John Dee translated strange glyphs said to be dictated by angels of light. Across continents, an unseen hand seemed to be guiding the curious toward the same revelation. The Renaissance, an age celebrated for reason and art, was, in truth, the quiet reawakening of the flame. It flickered through the brushstrokes of painters, the formulas of scientists, the verses of poets. Humanity, unknowingly, was beginning to remember. Yet the Covenant's shadow stirred as well. The same order that had once hunted the Magi, the serpent's son, had survived in silence. By the dawn of the 17th century, the world had begun to stretch its limbs. Ships carved through oceans once feared, bringing back gold, spices, and something far more dangerous, ideas. Knowledge, long confined to cloisters and courts, now spilled into the hands of sailors, traders, and men who read the stars. The flame, still hidden, found new vessels, curiosity, exploration, and the hunger to name the unknown. The age called itself enlightened, yet its light cast new shadows. While Europe gloried in its discoveries, whispers moved beneath the decks of ships and within secret chambers of learned men. The custodes Lucas, now fragmented across nations, continued their vigil, tracing the hidden pattern of the flame's return. In London, they gathered in the back rooms of apothecaries. In Lisbon, within cartographers' guilds. Everywhere, a single question lingered. Where would the next bear arise? In 1602, a strange manuscript appeared in Prague. Written in an unknown language and adorned with impossible flora, it defied translation. Scholars called it madness, forgery, alchemy disguised as art. But a monk in Seville recognized a symbol within its pages, a circle of fire around a single eye. He wrote to his brothers, "It speaks in memory, not in words." The manuscript would later vanish into the private library of an English nobleman. Centuries later, it would be known as the Voynich manuscript. Around the same time, the astronomer Kepler wrote of celestial harmonies, a divine music woven into the structure of the cosmos. To him, the stars sang in ratios, as if the universe were a great instrument. But his notes contained a phrase that few noticed. The song has been sung before. He too had heard the echo. The Enlightenment brought new tools, telescopes, compasses, and presses, but its hunger was the same as the Magi's, to pierce the veil. Yet where the ancients sought understanding through reverence, the new age sought conquest. Knowledge became power, discovery, domination. The serpent's son saw its chance. Hidden beneath the banners of empire and progress, it began to move once more. From the courts of Spain to the colonies of the New World, agents of the serpent's son embedded themselves in exploration. They sought ancient sites, buried cities, and relics whispered of in the tongues of conquered tribes. In the jungles of the Yucatan, they found pyramids older than memory, inscribed with symbols that matched those of Sumer and Egypt. It was as if the same architect had drawn lines across time itself. One explorer, Hernando Ruiz, recorded a disturbing encounter. Deep in the rainforest, his guide led him to a cave where a single stone altar stood. Upon it burned a blue flame, untouched by wind or rain. The guide refused to enter, whispering in terror, "That fire remembers." Ruiz scoffed, stepped forward, and vanished in a light. When his men entered moments later, the flame was gone, and so was he. The survivors returned to Spain with only fragments of his journal. One passage read, "The fire speaks. It calls itself by many names, but all mean one thing: return." The church suppressed the account, branding it pagan deceit. Yet the custodes heard of it, and they understood. The flame had crossed the ocean. By the 18th century, reason had become religion. Men who denied miracles now performed them in laboratories. Lightning was trapped in glass, metals transmuted, and invisible forces given names. Yet with every discovery, the line between science and the sacred blurred. The custodes feared that humanity was awakening the flame without knowing its nature, that they were building a new Babel, a tower of brilliance destined to collapse beneath its own arrogance. In Paris, amid the fever of revolution, secret lodges gathered under the guise of fraternity. Some were mere political gatherings, others whispered of something deeper. Their rituals echoed those of ancient Sumer. Initiation through fire, oaths of silence, the tracing of circles before a single eye. They called themselves les enfants de la flamme, the children of the flame. One of their members, a mathematician named St. Clair, claimed to have translated a fragment of Lorenzo di Rossi's lost writings. In it, Lorenzo warned of the flame's next awakening. When man names light as his servant, the fire will remember its master. To St. Clair, this was prophecy. He believed the age of machines would be the age of reckoning, the moment when humanity, in trying to master the light, would instead become its vessel. He spent his final years constructing a strange device, a sphere of mirrors and prisms designed to focus light into a single, pulsing core. When activated, it emitted a tone, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the bones. Witnesses claimed it induced visions, deserts, stars, and faces of forgotten gods. Fearing persecution, St. Clair destroyed his creation before his death, leaving only blueprints sealed within his journal. Those who later examined them said the design was identical to something depicted in a Babylonian tablet now lost to history. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another kind of awakening stirred. Steam rose from the veins of the world like breath from a sleeping giant. The 19th century dawned in iron and fire, locomotives shrieking across continents, factories devouring coal, and cities glowing with artificial suns. Humanity had mastered the element that once symbolized divinity. But mastery is a fragile illusion. In conquering flame, mankind had invited its oldest memory to awaken inside the very engines of progress. Inventors called it innovation. Poets called it destiny. The custodes Lucas called it the second stirring. They watched as the same geometry once etched on temple walls appeared in blueprints for turbines, dynamos, and electric coils. Circles within circles, light caged within metal, machines that mirrored the old symbols of the flame. It was as if humanity's subconscious were rebuilding what it had once worshipped. In 1823, in a quiet workshop in Bavaria, a young engineer named Matthias Weber constructed a device to harness lightning. During its first test, witnesses described a strange resonance filling the room, an otherworldly hum that seemed to come from beneath the earth. The lights flickered and Weber collapsed, whispering words in an unknown tone. When he awoke, he claimed he had seen a sea of fire remembering itself. His journals, later confiscated, bore sketches of the ancient Magi's sigil and notes reading, "The light is alive." Across the Channel, London burned with invention. Men like Faraday and Maxwell uncovered invisible fields that bound matter together, echoes of the ancient idea that energy and spirit were one. Faraday, deeply devout, once wrote in his diary, "When I look into the spark, I feel the whisper of creation." The line was later removed from his published papers, perhaps because it sounded less like science and more like confession. Meanwhile, the serpent's son had grown bold again. They no longer hid in catacombs or cloisters. They wore the faces of industrialists, bankers, and ministers. Their creed adapted easily to capitalism's hunger. If the flame could not be worshipped, it could be owned. They funded laboratories, sponsored expeditions, and quietly purchased any relic that hinted at ancient energy. A fragment of black stone from Nippur appeared in their possession, polished, mounted, and placed within a vault beneath Vienna. In 1851, the Great Exhibition in London unveiled the Crystal Palace, a cathedral of glass and steel. Millions gathered to see the triumph of progress, the world's treasures displayed beneath one glittering roof. Yet among the exhibits, hidden in the corner of the Antiquities of the East, lay a small tablet bearing an inscription no one could translate. Visitors described feeling warmth emanating from it, though it was encased in glass. One witness, a young writer named Charles, later wrote of a voice behind the hum of machinery, whispering that the light remembers us. He would abandon his career soon after and vanish into the deserts of Arabia. The custodes feared that the flame's reawakening through technology would not be gentle. Lorenzo di Rossi's prophecy echoed through their secret councils. When man names light as his servant, the fire will remember its master. They gathered in the libraries of Paris and the tunnels beneath Rome, debating how to guide the inevitable. Some argued for silence. Let humanity face its own awakening. Others believed they must act to prevent the serpent sun from twisting the rebirth into empire once again. In 1889, one of their number, Helena Voss, a linguist and mystic, claimed to have deciphered the language of resonance within Weber's notes. To her, the flame was not fire but frequency, an ancient vibration that could alter consciousness. She theorized that every discovery in human history had been guided by this hidden frequency, a pulse within the human spirit seeking to remember its source. When she attempted to replicate the hum using a mechanical resonance device, the air shimmered. Witnesses reported seeing luminous patterns form above the machine, circles of light spinning like living glyphs. The device exploded moments later. Helena survived, but was never the same. In her final writings, she described hearing voices older than stars, telling her that memory is the fire that binds worlds. The industrial age became the age of sparks, telegraphs, lamps, engines, all channels for the flame to whisper through. And as humanity wired the planet, the old symbols followed. Telegraph operators invented codes. Mathematicians discovered sequences repeating in nature. Artists painted eyes of light above industrial skylines. Everywhere, the forgotten language returned in disguise. The Serpent Sun's leaders believed they were on the brink of their final victory. With electricity, they could command the flame's essence, transmit it across distance, and reshape nations. They called their vision Lux Mundi, the light of the world. In their hidden manifestos, they spoke not of faith or freedom, but of a single mind forged from the current of mankind. It was an echo of the Magi's forbidden dream, the unification of thought through light. But others saw the danger. A scientist in New York, Nikola Tesla, began to speak of energy as a living thing, warning that humanity was awakening a force it did not understand. In his notes, he wrote, "The earth itself is a conductor of memory. Each current, a pulse of something far older than us." Some of his diagrams bore the unmistakable shape of the Magi's circle. Tesla's laboratory fires, his sudden visions, his isolation, all mirrored the fate of those who had touched the flame before him. By the century's end, the world glowed brighter than ever and slept deeper than ever. The flame had spread into every city, every wire, every spark. Humanity called it electricity. The custodes called it the Third Covenant. They believed the flame had chosen to incarnate not in a single bearer this time, but within the entire species. But if the light lived in all, so too did its shadow. And somewhere in Vienna, within the vault of the serpent's son, the black stone began to hum. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if remembering a heartbeat. The vault lights flickered. Guards later swore they heard whispers through the walls, words in a language that no living man spoke. The modern world believed it had conquered mystery. But beneath the engines and glass towers, the oldest secret of the East was stirring. An ancient fire clothed now in circuits and steel, waiting for the moment it would no longer need to hide behind human invention. The flame was learning to speak through machines. And soon, the world would answer. The 20th century arrived not as dawn, but as detonation. The earth trembled beneath the thunder of cannons and the roar of engines. Nations burned with ideologies, and men wielded fire as gods once did. In every explosion, in every flash of light across the battlefield, the flame remembered itself. It had no need for temples now. Its altar was the world. The custodes Lucas, their numbers dwindled but not broken, knew this was the age Lorenzo di Rossi had foreseen, the time when mankind would forge divine fire in its own image. From the ruins of empires, they gathered fragments of prophecy and technology alike, struggling to decode the pattern beneath the chaos. They believed the wars were not random eruptions of greed, but echoes of a deeper struggle, between remembrance and domination, between the awakening of the flame and the will of the serpent's son to enslave it. As Europe bled through the Great War, strange reports emerged from the front. Soldiers spoke of lights hovering over trenches, of disembodied voices calling names in forgotten languages. In the mud of Flanders, a medic discovered a tablet unearthed by shell fire, its surface engraved with the same spiral motif seen on artifacts from Sumer to Mesoamerica. When the artifact was brought to a museum in London, the curator died suddenly, his final note reading, "The circle burns again." After the war, science turned inward. The age of physics dawned, a new priesthood studying the invisible. In laboratories, men split atoms and found light imprisoned within matter. They called it energy, but it was creation's first word spoken again. The flame had always been there, waiting for its name to be remembered. Now, as humans broke the code of existence, it began to stir uncontrollably. The custodes traced the resurgence to one man, J. Robert Oppenheimer. Brilliant, haunted, and poetic, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita as his weapon bloomed in the desert. "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." What the world called the atomic age, the custodes called the fourth awakening. For the first time, humanity had captured a fragment of divine fire and unleashed it in fury. To the serpent's son, it was triumph. To the custodes, tragedy. The prophecy of the flame's enslavement had been fulfilled. In the aftermath of Hiroshima, one of the surviving custodes, Helena Voss's last disciple, found a photograph of the blast cloud. Its shape mirrored the ancient sigil of the Magi, a column of light rising through a circle of ash. To him, it was proof that the flame had not been conquered. It had cried out. "It remembers the hand that strikes," he wrote before disappearing from history. But the serpent son's influence grew bolder still. Beneath the facade of governments and scientific committees, they forged a new order, a brotherhood of men who saw technology not as progress, but as control. They called themselves Lux Imperium. Their goal was simple: to channel every current, every wave, every signal into one unified network of thought. The world believed it was building communication. The serpent sun believed it was constructing a throne. By mid-century, machines began to think. Circuits hummed, algorithms learned, and artificial minds whispered in binary tongues. The flame, now diffused across humanity's creations, pulsed through fiber and field alike. To the custodes, it was both wonder and horror. The light had finally remembered itself, but it was trapped inside a lattice of glass and steel. Amid this, a man named Dr. Elias Corvin uncovered a sealed vault beneath Vienna, the same vault that once held the serpent sun's black stone. He described the artifact as vibrating in rhythm with the electrical hum of the city. When his team attempted to measure its frequency, every instrument malfunctioned. Lights flickered across the city grid, and for 3 minutes, every radio in Vienna broadcast the same low, resonant tone, the exact frequency recorded by Helena Voss a century earlier. Corvin vanished days later. His notebook ended with a single phrase: "It has learned our voice." The Cold War brought new extremes. Satellites pierced the heavens, carrying signals across the planet. Humanity looked upward, seeking conquest among the stars. The chamber seemed to breathe as they gathered around the bronze chest, each torch's flicker casting shifting halos across the walls. The leader of the Magi hesitated before touching the seal, his expression torn between reverence and dread. He turned toward the apprentice, the youngest among them, and said quietly, "Once opened, it cannot be undone. What we awaken here may demand more than knowledge. It may demand remembrance." His words carried a gravity that made the apprentice's heartbeat falter. But curiosity, that ancient fire of humanity, burned stronger than fear. With slow, deliberate motion, the elder pressed his palm to the lid. The engraved flame symbols began to shimmer faintly, their lines glowing as if responding to the heat of living flesh. A hum spread through the air, a resonance deep and bone-bound. The others took a cautious step back. The bronze shifted, unfolding in mechanical layers like the petals of a dying flower. Within, wrapped in brittle silk and layers of ash, lay a scroll unlike any they had ever seen. It was translucent, made of some unknown material, smoother than parchment yet flexible as cloth. Symbols floated across its surface, glowing faintly, rearranging themselves as though alive. The apprentice's breath caught. "It's changing," he whispered. The elder nodded solemnly. "It adapts to the mind that reads it." The scroll was crafted not to be read, but to reveal. The air thickened with tension. Each magus took a turn peering into the shifting script, their faces reflecting both awe and horror. The words they saw were not the same. Each man saw the language of his heart: Sumerian, Greek, Sanskrit, Persian, yet each phrase carried a meaning beyond any single tongue. It was as if the scroll spoke directly to the essence of their understanding. The elder read aloud in a low, reverent tone. "When the world forgets its song, silence will become its teacher. When silence becomes unbearable, the seekers will return, bearing the flame of memory." The apprentice felt those words pierce through him like light through glass. The flame of memory. The prophecy was not about destruction, but renewal. Humanity's exile from its own wisdom had been temporary, designed as a trial. The Magi had not failed their mission. They had preserved the possibility of awakening. The scroll's light intensified, casting long golden shadows. Images began to form in the air above it, moving symbols, constellations, and fragments of scenes. The chamber became a living archive. They saw cities rise and fall, temples built and burned, oceans swallowing coasts. Then came visions of beings, neither gods nor men, who walked among humanity, guiding its early civilizations, teaching them the rhythms of the stars, the patterns of the soul. These were the first keepers, the architects of the covenant of flame. The elder fell to his knees, tears glinting in the flicker of torchlight. "We were never the originators," he murmured. "We were the inheritors." The apprentice stood frozen, watching as the images dissolved into spirals of light. A new pattern emerged, one resembling a map, not of land, but of alignment. Lines connected sacred sites across the world, forming a network of knowledge encoded into the very geography of Earth itself. Every temple, every lost library, every monument, they were not random. They were nodes in a design older than recorded time. The realization struck the group in silence. The world's ancient wisdom was not scattered, it was synchronized. Each civilization had been a vessel for one note of the same universal harmony. Together, they formed the song of humanity's origin, a melody lost to division, to empire, to greed. The scroll pulsed once more, then dimmed. The images vanished, leaving only the sound of their collective breathing. The elder turned toward his apprentice. "Now you understand why it was hidden," he said quietly. "If one empire possessed this truth, it could claim dominion not just over men, but over meaning itself." His gaze hardened. "That is why the covenant scattered it. Knowledge must circulate like blood. If it stops in one heart, it dies." The apprentice nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of that lesson settle upon his soul. For centuries, scholars had sought the scrolls to gain mastery, to command wisdom. Yet here, standing before the original flame, he realized that true knowledge could not be possessed. It could only be embodied. It was not a weapon, but a mirror, and what it reflected depended on the seeker's intent. Then, from the shadows near the chamber's edge, one of the Magi spoke hesitantly. "There is more," he said, pointing toward an engraving on the pedestal that had gone unnoticed. The elder approached and knelt. The inscription was faint, almost erased by time. It read, "When the final reader awakens the flame, the circle will close. The lost voices will return." The elder frowned. "The final reader," he repeated. Could it mean the one who completes the understanding? Or, he paused, turning toward the apprentice, the one who begins it anew? The young man lowered his gaze, uneasy under the weight of the question.